All right, we're good to go. How's everyone doing out there? Welcome to another Friday live stream. Hello to Perth, Australia, Western Australia. Yes, let's see. Do a quick look at the live chat and see where people are joining us from, and we'll get started. Essex, UK. All right. See here, from Sussex, UK, from Toronto, Cleveland, Fairborn, Ohio, Cheshire, UK. All right, Buffalo, New York, Liverpool, UK, London Calling, Yorkshire, London, Wales, Florida, Indiana, Canada, BC, greetings from Greece, from Southern Mexifornia. Not sure that's a country. Is that a country, Mexifornia? I don't think so. Chaz is a country though, or Chop.
Chaz is a country.
Chaz or Chop, whatever it's called now.
There's a part of California which is still in Mexico. I mean, I don't know whether it
You're in Baja California?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Still in California.
All right, Florida. A couple people from Florida, from Brisbane, Sweden, Gothenburg, Alabama, Arkansas, South Africa, Holland, from Perth. Valies, thank you for that super chat. Valies, you've kicked things off again. How are things in Ohio? Valley, yes. Slovakia. Hello to everybody. Slovakia, from Belgrade, Serbia, from Moscow. All right. Well, we got someone else in Moscow, the host of RT Crosstalk, Mr. Peter Lavelle. Peter, how you doing?
I'm seeing if I can establish diplomatic relations with Chop.
Yes, Chop.
I don't know
what's it going to be next week.
Present my credentials to, though. Okay. However, Juan Guaido has a lot of time on his hands. He might want to apply for warlord of Chop. And I'm just saying, okay, the guy's available. He's got time on his hands.
Well, maybe he can take like one of the minister positions, you know, Minister of Finance or
yeah, right.
development, culture and development.
Job.
All right. Okay, let's see. Wales, UK, Essex, UK, Asheville, North Carolina, Atlantic City, New Jersey, Lincolnshire, New Zealand, from Wakanda. That's also not a country. Wakanda is not a country. That is a movie. Is it not? Yeah. That's the Black Panther movie. We got a lot of fictional places going around, don't we? A lot of fictional countries.
Well, if you listen to NBC News, there's a lot of fictional information.
There you go. Hello, guy. Hello, guys from Spain.
Farcical story. Oh my God.
From Melbourne, Australia. Well, we'll get into some real news today. We have from the real city of London, the Oracle of London, Alexander Mercurse. How are you, Alexander?
I'm very well. Looking forward to the CHOP embassy, which I'm sure is going to be opened here before very long. And Sadiq Khan, our mayor, will no doubt be there to receive the ambassador of CHOP when he or she arrives. But for myself, extremely well here in London. The weather has turned downcast and wet after a glorious spring. But we're now back to normal as things, as we say. So lockdown is ending and the weather has turned bad.
All right. Hello to Toronto, to Dublin, to Mumbai, to Pittsburgh, Kaliningrad. Let's get rolling, guys. We have got a good deal to talk about. Vladimir Putin's essay that is featured in National Interest. I put the link in the description box down below. The title of that essay, of that article, is The Real Lessons of the 75th Anniversary of World War II. It's a good read. It's a little bit of a long read, but it's well worth it. So I encourage everyone to check it out in the description box down below. And there's a lot of what Putin says that is relevant in today's world, and we are going to unpack it all. But Alexander, you read this. Did you read it last night?
I read it last night. I mean,
Okay, so just give us the basic concept of it, and then you and Peter can discuss either the historical aspects of what Putin said. But I think what's more interesting is if we bring it up up to today's news and what's going on in the world, because I think there's a lot of red flags that Putin is warning us about. So, Alexander, give us a little bit of the context.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very long, extremely erudite essay about the origins of the Second World War and who was responsible for starting the Second World War. And he goes into great detail about the diplomatic history in the lead up to the Second World War, and that's his primary focus. And its basic purpose, or at least its overt purpose, is to respond to what he refers to as historical revisionism. This is the attempt of certain people in Eastern Europe and Central Europe and certain well, academic historians, you might say, to try to suggest that Russia or the Soviet Union was equally responsible for the commencement of the war as Nazi Germany was. So it's an attack on people like Timothy Snyder, whom Peter will say more about shortly, and perhaps the present Polish government. And he's clearly also very incensed by a decision, that a statement that was published by the European Parliament a short time ago, which seemed to attribute equal responsibility to Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union for starting World War II. And his basic theme is that World War II began because the Western powers rejected offers of cooperation from Russia, from the Soviet Union, for cooperation to contain Hitler. Instead, they pursued a policy of appeasement. That policy of appeasement in the end failed. It only allowed Hitler and the Germans, Nazis, to gain strength both in Germany and to rearm. And in the end, it turned out to be completely disastrous. This, by the way, is a view of historical events which would have been considered almost mainstream just a short while ago. In the West and in Central Europe, it's been challenged, I think mainly for political reasons. I think that this view of the history that Putin is describing is essentially the right one, but clearly he feels a strong need to reassert it. He also, along the way, discloses one or two interesting facts of which I was not, I don't think historians have been aware of, but which are clearly extracted from the archives, the Russian and German archives that the Russians have in Moscow. I would remind our viewers, the Red Army captured Berlin in 1945, and vast quantities of German documents were taken from Berlin to Moscow at that time. And I know that the Russians have been working on collating them and reading them and analyzing them ever since. We're talking about millions of documents, and they seem to be finally coming to the point where they've got a fair understanding of what was in those documents. So we'll no doubt touch upon all of that too. But the other thing he's doing in this long piece is obviously he's looking back at the origins of the Second World War. He's also looking forward at the present contemporary situation. And his argument basically is that there are certain similarities between the world then and the world now, and that he's very concerned about those similarities. He sees a drift to conflict and a drift, even if you like, to war. And he is talking about the past as a way of giving warnings about the present and the future. And I agree. I think in some ways that is the more important and the more interesting aspect of this. As somebody who originally trained as a historian, I'm very interested about some of the historical revelations in this long article. But as I said, it's the present and the future which this article touches on, which I think is ultimately the more important.
Well, there's so much to unpack from this article. I mean, right before we started our live broadcast, I said to Alexander Makiris that this article in itself is a historical document. It is it's only 2 or 3 days old, and it's a historical artifact because it really gives you an insight on how the Russia of today sees those events 75 years ago. And it's written with such clarity and honesty, I would say, as well. And Alexander Makiris is absolutely right. Up until a few years ago, this was standard history. Now, Alexander Makiris is also right that we get little nuggets, historical documents that are revealed that tell us a little bit more about the events that unfolded. And really what Putin's article is about taking responsibility on the international stage. Now, the whole thing is, it's the Soviet-Nazi pact of August 1939. That's the whole thing here, and this is what is used as a cudgel against Russia, the Russia of today, meaning giving it historical equivalency, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. And that is a total misreading of what's going on. In the article, we're given a very good step-by-step process of how the international system and particularly in Europe, under the leadership of the French and the British, collapsed. And who collapsed it? It was the French and the British. They appeased Hitler. Now, there's a long argument about appeasement, and I think it's not so clear cut. The British in the early 30s once the Nazis came to power, the Nazis made it very clear through their rhetoric they were going to be very aggressive at home and later abroad. And we saw that as early as 1936, is that Germany would violate the Treaty of Versailles with impunity. Okay, and this is another thing that Soviet historians and now Russian historians look at. This is when the system started falling apart under the leadership of France and Britain. Russia wasn't allowed into that system. It was a pariah, and we would use the term sanctioned today. And then it goes up to Munich, and Munich is used. So many people say Munich and appeasement, and they don't even know what they're talking about, particularly on cable TV. It was the British and the French that allowed the breakup of a sovereign country without that sovereign country's input, Czechoslovakia. They weren't even at the table, okay? And they broke up that state. We know historically that Hitler was outraged that they would actually agree to this because he wanted war. He didn't want to get the Sudetenland peacefully. He wanted to get it through force. That's what he wanted. And much to his bewilderment, it's like, you guys actually going to do this? The Soviet Union wasn't allowed to be part of the process. And a good part of the article points out that Poland also was part of the partition of Czechoslovakia. And so when that happened, what do you draw from it? Well, whatever the British and the French say, or the Italians, it doesn't count. It doesn't matter. Anything that they signed, any kind of document they signed, isn't worth the paper it's written on. That was the lesson. And the Soviets drew that lesson. Yeah. You can't trust these guys. No. Nonetheless, the crisis in Munich, the Soviets knew that war was coming to Europe and that they would be on the front line sooner or later. For the Nazis to have mastery over Europe, so the Soviet Union had to be subdued. The Soviets reached out to the British, particularly, to find some kind of security agreement. And it's really very interesting. It was the summer of 1939. What did the British do? They sent their delegation to the Soviet Union on a boat with instructions, you're in no hurry. Don't worry, okay? Because they equivocated. Because they really weren't sure they wanted to have some kind of security agreement with the Soviet Union. What did the Germans do? Ribbentrop flew on an airplane, was there in a few hours. The message was very, very clear. So the agreement itself is that time had run out, and the Soviet Union, like any other rational sovereign actor, was acting out of its interest. We also have the secret protocols, which everybody likes to use that as a cudgel too. Yeah, it's pretty outrageous. Yep, it was, okay? All of the things that they split up, yep. But you know what? There was no international law because the people that were supposed to be underwriting international law had abandoned it.
Yeah.
So this is how we got here. And saying that, did the Soviet Union want war? It certainly did not want war at all. It didn't want it. The Germans, the Nazis did want war. And they demonstrated it over and over again. And that's when we had the crisis of Poland. So Poland participates in 1938 in the partition of Czechoslovakia. And the next year, it was their turn. And again, the feelers going out, would Poland join the Soviet Union in some kind of defensive pact? The Poles said no. Their fate was sealed. Okay, so that is the history that Putin talks about in his article.
Yeah. I just wanted to add two things. Very, very
So
fine
many
overview. So many things. There's two things. Firstly, I mean, talking about just some of the things that Putin reveals that we didn't know. He drops more than just a hint. He essentially says that the Soviets, that the Russians know, and presumably have evidence of secret discussions that supposedly took place between the British and the Germans in the summer of 1939. And there's some suggestion that there were some secret agreements made at that time, which have never been published. Now, I'm guessing that this is based on information that's come out of the archives. And I would suspect that we're going to find out more about it. Yeah.
Alex, we need to point out to our viewers that he didn't have footnotes, so we don't know what the reference is.
Exactly. So that is new, and that is extremely interesting, that the British have many things about the diplomatic history and the conduct of the Second World War that they have kept quiet about. That is indisputable. I mean, I know certain things myself that I can confirm that the British have not wanted to talk about. So that is interesting in itself. But put that aside, because that's going to be something that we're going to find out more about. The other thing that struck me about this article was its enormous and powerful and sustained criticism of the Versailles system. It was his point is that Versailles was an unjust and unequal treaty, that he treated Germany most inappropriately. He doesn't actually talk about the way it treated Russia at that time, but I'm sure he would say that he treated Russia inappropriately also, and that it created an international system in Europe that was inherently and dangerously unjust and therefore unstable. And again, I can't help but think that this has it parallels with the contemporary world, with especially some of the things that have happened since the Soviet Union fell in 1991, that agreements were reached with the Soviet Union, which were not honored. There's been this expansion of NATO. There's been this extraordinary remilitarization that's been happening in Europe. We're drifting back into an arms race. We've had exceptionalist language coming out of the United States. We've had all this talk about a unipolar moment. I think the parallels he's making there are, for me, very clear and very obvious. An unsustainable system before the Second World War eventually was what led to the Second World War. An unsustainable and unfair system today has the dangers, inherent dangers, of leading to a much greater crisis further down the road. So just those 2 points that I wanted to add to the things that Peter said.
The parallel to today is, for example, the United States specifically is just walking away from arms control agreements, okay, without something in its place, okay? No. This is appalling. This is simply appalling.
Yes.
All right. And of course, we have the unipolar moment after the end of the Cold War, where the illegal invasions of countries, forced regime changes, illegal occupations going on, and the irony, of course, out of the halls of London and Washington, they're always talking about norms, international norms, but that's not normal. This type of behavior, normal is what you're supposed to do, not what we do, and this is one of the things that Putin is talking.
Yes.
About. It's just the hypocrisy of the international system, and it is an international system. There's some that call the shots, and everyone else is expected to follow in suit, and that is not going to happen. And the parallel to the 1930s is the same thing. We had the League of Nations that the United States never joined. And it was a place, a forum to grieve, to voice grievances. And they were not, look what happened to Abyssinia and what's Ethiopia today, okay, with Italy, all right? Nothing was done, all right? Look at what, Japan's aggression in China, nothing was done. So, I mean, characters like Hitler saying, this is a paper tiger. I mean, they say they believe in international law, but they don't practice it.
Yes.
So everyone likes us to go to, Munich and then August 1939. But we have a whole chain of events since the end of the First World War that shows that the system was by its very design was malfunctioning from day one. Okay.
Yes.
And one of the things, and Putin alluded to it in his article, is that the Western powers recognize new sovereign states, primarily in Eastern Europe. But it's the same thing with the German recognition of Croatia in the breakup of Yugoslavia. You don't recognize it if it's not a viable state, okay? And so what they did was they gave these countries in Eastern Europe security guarantees that they never could keep.
Exactly.
Okay? And the Germans knew that, and so did the Soviets. Now, I want to make it very, very clear. International relations is not the realm of virtue, okay? It's the realm of national interest. And as much as I was never a fan of the Soviet Union, I am no fan of communism, no fan of Marxism, but the Soviet state, irrespective of its ideological coloring, will have national interests, and it acted in those national interests. Now, did it take advantage of the international system that had collapsed? Yes, it did. All countries do that. Okay, so don't look for virtue here.
Yes.
The Soviets should have saved the Poles during the Warsaw Uprising. Why? Why? What's in their national interest? They should have done the right thing. Nations don't do the right thing. Yeah. Get that through your head. They act out of national interest. So don't look for virtue. Now, you could say, the United States and Syria, how does that advance its national security agenda? It doesn't. And that's why it shouldn't be doing it. And a number of times, like the collapse of Poland in 1939, the Soviets could have gone much further into the country, but they said, no, we're not going any farther. We agreed to this point, okay? We agreed, all right? The Germans wanted them to come in. They said, well, we have an agreement, okay? As much as you may abhor that pact, the Soviets kept their side of it. The Germans didn't.
I mean, this is a very important point because, of course, one of the things that Putin says is that he does not approve of the Soviet Union either. He does not approve of Stalin and the things that start Stalin's repressions and his cruelties. But he makes a very clear distinction between Stalin's domestic policies and his conduct of foreign relations. And he talks very clearly in exactly the way that Peters says about states following their national interests. And in fact, he even quotes, and Putin does this with approval, a comment that Churchill makes about how the Russians always act coldly in their own interests. I mean, this is an essay written by someone who takes a completely realistic view, a realist view of international relations. If you're looking for, utopian projects for, expanding democracy, humanitarian interventionism, leading crusades, all that kind of thing, he not only refuses to be tempted by any of all of that, he actually emphatically rejects it. He considers it to be one of the factors that before the Second World War made the international system unstable and which are making it unstable now. So it's a coldly realist assessment of international relations before the Second World War by somebody who is coldly realistic about international relations now. And I have to say, I think he is right about this. Just as Peter says, I think you cannot expect states to do anything other than act in their own interests in the context of international relations. If you understand that and base your foreign policy on it, then you are far more likely to achieve results, positive results, to build real cooperation between states and to establish peace than you will do if you follow utopian projects, which in the end are always self-serving anyway.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you mentioned it. I mean, there's nothing in this article that talks about Russia's exceptionalism.
No,
zero.
Nothing. Zero.
Okay, and Stalin is criticized in the article for his purges and violence against his own people. So, I mean, he's very balanced that way. Again, we really need to stress that this article is a reaction. First of all, it comes on the 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War, which is a very important holiday in the country, which will be celebrated. It was postponed because of the pandemic, but it will be celebrated, I think, next week.
Yes.
They keep the historical record straight, because we keep seeing this revision. You know, why now? I mean, it's kind of like, you know, the way I look at it, it's kind of like the Armenian genocide. I mean, why did the Turks keep saying it didn't happen? First of all, it happened under the Ottomans. It didn't happen during the state of Turkey. All right. Yes. I mean, I don't know why people cling to these things here. And what it is that the Western powers, particularly the United States, it sees that it is losing control of narratives, that it needs to embellish, to bolster its foreign policy agenda, which is global hegemony, okay? And they're seeing it being contested, and that's why they're willing to rewrite it. I mean, 1619 in the United States are willing to completely rewrite the history of the United States for their present day political interests. And this is why it's happening also now when we look at the revisionist thoughts that are being presented. I mean, I can remember, Alexander Maker, it was like in 1992 or something like that. A Russian historian came out and said, Stalin planned to attack Western Europe. Okay, he had all these plans, and he was, you know, I remember when he had the New York Review of Books, it was a big deal. And I remember looking at it and I said, yeah, that's called the contingency. All kinds of, every country, large country have contingencies, almost like a war game. Okay, I mean, we see that happening now. Okay. That's what all these military exercises are. They're contingencies.
Yes, he actually touches on that particular point in the article very briefly. I mean, he says that it was contingency planning in case the Soviet Union was attacked, that it would go rapidly on the offensive because that was its military philosophy at the time. And I think this is right. It was Viktor Suvorov, as I remember, who was a man both brilliant and rather strange.
Yeah, very eccentric.
Very eccentric, and certainly not a reliable source on these sort of subjects. So, you know, just to say. But as I said, it's a fascinating read, very clear, rather long, as Peter says and Alex says, but you know, an interesting read nonetheless. But as I said, it does give you a very, very clear picture, not just about the way the Russians. And by the way, when Putin writes in this way, he speaks for the overwhelming majority of Russians. This is very, very much the view most Russians have of the Second World War, even if they are, and many Russians are familiar with Western arguments, but this is definitely the view that they have about the Second World War. So if you want to know what Russians think about the origins of the Second World War, this is a good place to start. But it is also, as I said, very, very interesting for what it reveals about Russian thinking, about the world today, and about the warnings he is giving. It is, you know, that if you create an unsustainable international system based on a mixture of self-serving ideas and also utopian ideas, it will lead to disaster. Yeah. And force. Well, you know, all of those things come together. It will lead you to disaster. The Versailles system was programmed almost to fail, and so is the system that we have now.
All right.
You know,
well,
it's also very, very interesting is that these Timothy Snyder types, they want to see equivalence because both were totalitarian regimes. Okay, they both were. Okay, but it doesn't. You're just because you're a totalitarian regime does not mean you don't have national interests. And see, they're trying to equate the two, which is actually folly. Nazi ideology was the precursor to or the reasoning for expansion. I mean, the Nazi regime would have collapsed if it didn't expand. That's why it had to go to war. the Soviet Union did not have to go to war to maintain its sovereignty, okay? And so Timothy Snyder and all these other sorts are just saying it's because they're both ideologically similar. Well, they're not similar at all right? One was a genocidal racist regime. The Soviet Union was based on an ideology about class struggle, okay? So it had nothing to do with racism. And so they're just trying to skirt these issues here. They're ideologically very, very different and had very different foreign policy agendas, in which you have to recognize if you're being honest.
All right. Well, oh, by the way, guys, the article is linked in the description box. So everyone that's asking can find the article there. Let's bring this up to date. Guys,
Yeah,
let's bring this up to date to today. I think that's even more interesting.
Yes.
But both Peter and Alexander, you guys touched on it, the theme of changing history.
Yes.
And we're seeing it in geopolitics. We're seeing it between nation states. We're seeing it at the EU with how they're viewing the beginning of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing it on a social level.
Yes.
Everything that's going on in the US as well.
Yes.
Peter mentioned the New York Times and the 1619 project that they have going on. Yeah, this where they're trying to rewrite much of American history and the Civil War and all that stuff. So is this a warning from Putin? Is he trying to tell us something? Do you think that the Russian president sees a potential conflict or some sort of war or some very, very bad stuff on the horizon? And that's why the timing of this essay?
Absolutely. And can I just, no question, but I think also, and you touch on a very important point, which I do want to deal with briefly, is I think he is very alarmed by the misuses of history and the way in which history is in effect being rewritten. And you mentioned how, you know, the history of international relations has been rewritten, as he would say, but it's also domestic history which is being rewritten. The 1619 project is all about rewriting the history of the United States, so that, you know, the founding fathers are no longer founding fathers of the United States as we have it. They are somehow almost become criminal figures. It's very interesting to see how Putin looks at Russian history and says you have to look at every part of it. You see the positive and the negative, and he sees these very destructive forces, as he would say, in the United States and in Britain, which and in other places, which are seeking to reject their own history and to substitute a different idea of history in place of it. And he sees that, I think, not only as destructive in terms of these societies themselves, but he also sees this as a danger to international relations, because the problem always is that when you rewrite history in that way, internally, it changes your whole position in the way that you approach and work with other countries too, because it always means that instead of pursuing international relations based on historical facts, you pursue international relations based on fabricated narratives. And I think he thinks that's a very dangerous thing. Yeah, so I just wanted to say that. I just wanted to make that point.
Well, it's very, very clear, this revisionist history, that only up until a few years ago, it was settled history.
Yes, I know.
Settled history, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But one of the reasons why it's changing is that the mandarins in power, they see that NATO is more and more irrelevant, and they have to find a way to legitimize its existence, and that is to make Russia the enemy. Yes. I mean, think about this, how extraordinary that is that it was the bulk of the bloodshed lost fighting Nazi Germany was on the Eastern Front. I mean, it's not even there's no even a comparison about that. Okay, the bloodletting on the East was just horrific. It's never been seen in history on that level. And so to deny the Soviet, first of all, blame the Soviet Union for the start of the Second World War, and then and on top of it, not giving them credit for ending the Second World War in Europe. That's what's at stake right here. Yes. And let's face it, the European Union project is in tatters right now. So what do you need? You need an outside enemy to find cohesion within. And this is another thing that's happening. It's all very, very convenient. And it's those 5,000 NATO employees in Brussels. They really need this revisionist history so they can keep their nice, cushy jobs. All right. I mean, there are vested interests here. I mean, this is not just academic, okay? No. It's part of the real world, okay? And because of the Soviet Union's culpability, let's call it, then they're not worthy of engagement. And then that's what we see with the end of these arms control agreements, okay? The US is leaving arms control not out of strength, but out of weakness. And because they need a free hand. And because hegemony is being challenged right now. These agreements, logically speaking, would keep the United States and its partners safe. You know, and I've always made it very clear to people, countries don't have to like each other. Let's not bring in the psychology here. Countries have relationships because it furthers their national interest. Not having an arms race serves the national interests of all great countries, okay, all great powers. So the illogic that's being played here, it has a lot to do with just present political agendas and needing an outside adversary to justify illegal invasions, illegal regime changes like in Ukraine, illegal occupations like in Syria, the unwillingness to leave Afghanistan and Iraq. And we could go on, and Libya, for example, as well. So never talk about a rules-based world when it comes to the Western powers, particularly the United States. The United States doesn't see anything. It doesn't want anything that will hinder its unilateral action in the world. And agreements, international agreements and conventions would impinge upon that freedom of action. That's what John Bolton is all about, okay?
I mean, the point about equating Nazi Germany with Russia is, of course, that way you make Russia, you're able to identify Russia as an enemy comparable to Nazi Germany. And that absolutely suits some very dangerous agendas among some people in the United States and especially in Europe at the moment. So I think a lot of that this is where that is coming from. If you create that narrative, which as Putin correctly says is a false narrative, then, as I said, you're going down all kinds of perilous routes. So he is worried about the misappropriation of history for dangerous ends. And of course, he's very conscious as he does that he comes from a country where people did try and create historical narratives. This has happened a lot during the Soviet period. So he is very acutely conscious of the dangers of this. Carry on.
Is he also conscious of the fact that there is something rising, an evil that does seem to be rising out of the US and has now spread to the UK? And we see bits of it in Paris as well, in France. It stretches all the way to Australia, this new religion, this new ideology that is springing up, that is getting very well funded, that is causing all kinds of problems, and definitely has a target group and a target people with which they want to. It's in the ideology, it's baked in the religion. I mean, this movement is saying that much by the statues they're tearing down and the rhetoric. There's a target group.
Well,
there is a target group, and maybe Putin is sensing that something evil is rising.
Well, he does. I mean, he has for a long time, actually. I mean, he is clearly utterly horrified about these events. And he's actually said so. I mean, he said so separately from this article. He has actually made it very clear that he is not in favor of these processes that he sees in the United States and Britain, especially in the United States, at all. And by the way, from what I've been able to understand, most Russians are not either. They don't understand the forces that are driving this, driving all of this. But to the extent that they do understand it, they are frankly alarmed by it. That's absolutely my sense about this. And I think that Putin is looking at the West at the moment, and he's very, very concerned by what he sees there. Peter?
Peter?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is what we're witnessing is the collapse of legitimate authority. This is the problem here. And I think that there is an acute awareness. I mean, the chaos that the U.S. has brought to the world is coming to the United States, and we see a lot of instability. I mean, we already did a video on this. This is a forced regime, a colored revolution going on, and it's come home. And so I think everyone should be very worried about that. I think really what Putin's message is here is that you have to come down and sit at the table and negotiate in good faith. And with this historical revisionism is a very strong signal that there is no good faith out there.
No.
And I think that's what concerns him the most. I mean, what's really bizarre is that back in January, I remember when we did a crosstalk on this, is that an editorial came out of the New York Times and maybe the Trump administration should reach out to Russia to join against China. I mean, after everything we've been through, with Russiagate and Ukrainegate, and now, they again, where's the institutionalization of keeping the peace, okay? And no, it has to be, the US has to decide what it's going to be. Well, you can do that to Libya. Maybe you can do that to Syria to some extent, but you can't do it to China and Russia, okay? And you can't do it to Iran either, all right? So, I mean, the authority is being questioned in the West. That's really at stake here. And if the authorities are under siege, how can they be good stewards of the international system? They can't.
No, of course not. I mean, that's an absolutely key point. If the United States cannot agree about its own history, how can it be? It cannot even agree about what it itself is. How can it become a partner to work with in international relations? And if there is violence of this kind within the United States, combined with the violence that the United States has carried out in other places like Iraq, like Libya, like Yugoslavia, like wherever, then that makes it dangerous. And it all comes back to this issue of an unsustainable system, which is what Putin is talking about, and of an ideological manipulation of historical facts, which clearly very greatly alarms him. Can I repeat again? When I talk about Putin, he speaks on this question for Russia. The Russians have many differences of views about many things, but on this issue, you will find very, very few Russians who would disagree with Putin on any of it, both about, what is going on in the United States now, and about the history that we've been discussing, and about the dangers in the international system that we've also been talking about.
It's very interesting too. It wasn't directly said, not that I remember reading. The Soviet armies, I mean, they were from all the constituent republics of the Soviet Union. That's why we're pretty pedantic here. I use Soviet when it's appropriate, okay? When I say Soviet, I mean all of the peoples of the Soviet Union. Though, to be fair, the Russian nation took the brunt of it. But the soldiers that fought on the Eastern Front, they fought for Russia. They fought to maintain a country, a civilization, and a culture. They didn't fight for communism. Maybe some did. I don't discount that, but it wasn't ideological. All right. I mean, the Nazi war aims were driven by Nazi ideology. Soldiers fighting in the Red Army were fighting to protect their families and their culture, their language, their history. All right. So I mean, and I think Putin was very good about that because they did carry the Soviet banner, but they were fighting for a way of life, their way of life, and not to be subjugated by another power. And that's very important to remember.
Yeah, but that's what this new ideology is, isn't it? It's about subjugation.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the whole foundation of it, and I think that's what's worrying Putin.
Yes,
it's probably worrying the entire world.
Yes.
There's a lot of discussion. Okay, you can't discuss. It's decided. Someone has decided. Okay. That's what's terrifying about the time.
Yes.
So is Russia preparing? Because in his article, in his essay, he makes it a point to say that the Soviet Union did everything it could in its power to buy time.
Yes.
And so I start to think that going all the way back to the Maidan and even further back, it seems that Russia has been trying to, number one, get out of the hold of the Western system, the
Yep.
Western financial
absolutely.
system, say, and the Western geopolitical system. It's actually been pushed out as well.
Good.
But that's that's fine. But also with regards to buying up a lot of gold and kind of preparing the economy, it seems that Putin is
No
bracing
debt.
Russia.
Almost no debt.
Yeah, is bracing Russia for what's coming. So is that another one of his warnings? Is that, look, we're preparing for some bad stuff to go down, and we're starting to see this movement, this ideology rising up. And some people may think it's small, some people may think it's insignificant, but as we head to an election in 2020, an election that maybe being won by Biden, who's, going to be an empty suit of a president, we need to be worried, because all hell could seriously break loose. All hell could break loose. And like we said, this ideology is not forgiving.
Yeah, but
this ideology is punishing.
Let's look at today's politics. If Biden is elected, all of the Russiagate investigations will come to an end.
Yes.
Okay. And so again, Russia will be front and center, the enemy, because they'll just push all the attempted coup against Trump aside. Okay. And then they can reset US-Russia relations back to Hillary in 2016. Okay. I mean, that's very, very important. So it's not just ideology, it's about practical politics today. I think it's very two-tiered. What's going on in the United States? I mean, it is kind of interesting is that you have this cultural revolution, and we know what happened in China, okay? And it was a disaster. And I see that happening to the United States. What happens to the stewardship of foreign policy as the country is consumed in a cultural civil war? I mean, that is quite dangerous. And then what you do is any leader, and I don't exclude Trump, to look for a foreign boogeyman to try to keep everything together. Because there's only one thing that keeps the elites, I don't care what party they're in, the elites have a bipartisan foreign policy of naked aggression and exceptionalism. And if you look what's happening to the Democratic Party and what's happening to the Republican Party, they're both under siege right now. You have the AOCs, you have the Bernie bros, and then the other side, we just saw that Supreme Court ruling that gives Title IX to a whole group of people now. A lot of conservatives in the Republican Party are going to say, what's going on here? This is not what we voted for in Trump. So you see both wings of the political spectrum under siege right now. And I worry that, foreign policy will be the cudgel to keep everyone in line. So I think it's a very dangerous time right now. But to answer very specifically what you said, Russia has prepared for this since 2009, after the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. It got burned very badly in Western financial markets, and it's withdrawn from it. It's insulated itself. It's bought a lot of gold. It's gotten rid of its debts. It's almost a debt-free government now. It's really quite remarkable. And then we have this huge drop in oil prices, and they prepared for that. They can go on for at least 5, 6, 7, 8 years with low oil prices, and we've seen oil prices come up. So to answer your question, are they prepared? Yes.
Yeah. Alexander, what's
what I was just wanting to say, first of all, I because I know Putin gave an interview in which he discussed the protests in the United States, and I found his comments, and I thought it might be of interest. He said, these are his words, I'm reading from TASS: "What has happened in the United States is the manifestation of some deep domestic crisis. When US President Donald Trump assumed office, when he won and his victory was absolutely obvious and democratic, the defeated party invented all sorts of bogus stories just to call into question his legitimacy. It seems to me that the problem is that group party interests in this case are placed above the interests of the entire society and the interests of people." It goes on, Putin calls the riots over racial issues in the United States and Europe a destructive phenomenon, stressing that Russia needs to hold on to its multinationalism. We'll look what can be forecast there. In any case, these are destructive phenomena, no doubt. He paid attention to the calls that African Americans should be treated only by African American doctors, noting that in such multi-ethnic countries like Russia, it would be absurd to imagine that the Mari people are treated only by the Mari. And then he goes on, when it acquires an element of such radical nationalism and extremism, nothing good can come of it. When campaigns for natural legal rights take the shale of violence and looting, I see nothing good for the state here. So he's made his views about this absolutely clear. He doesn't like these protests in any way at all. He is horrified by the way things are going, and he said so. Now, this was said, by the way, on Russian domestic television. There's an interview he did on a Russian domestic TV channel. Now, has Russia prepared? The answer is it has. It's piled up, as Peter said, foreign reserves. It's piled up gold reserves. It's focused on achieving agricultural food sufficiency, which it has done. It has paid off all its foreign debt. It's kept its own levels of debt very low. It has been able to insulate itself from oil price falls. And of course, a fact which people don't notice is that it's also built up its military forces very considerably. It's developed hypersonic weapons, it's developed large degrees of radar systems, it's created, it's developing new tanks, armored vehicles, ships, you name it. But the other thing it's doing is, because it's giving up increasingly on partnership with the United States, which was, to be very clear, in the 1990s and when Putin first became president, its preferred foreign policy option. It is perforce forging an ever closer relationship with China. And we're now going to have the Chinese defense minister coming to Moscow for the World War II victory celebrations, which we spoke about, which Peter spoke about, which I think are happening on Wednesday, by the way. So the Chinese will be there, no Western country will be. And that is in itself a comment about the way in which Russia is being forced to look at changes in its policies as a result of what it sees coming out of the West. And it sees all of these things as connected. There's a famous expression, which is sometimes attributed to Lenin, that all things are connected. It's a Russian expression. So they look at these events within the United States. They look at what the United States is doing internationally. They look at the way they themselves have been demonized. And by the way, to touch on a point that you were making, Alex, of course they're conscious of the fact that they are a European country, or that they're seen as a white country by these people in the United States. They're perfectly well aware of this. Certainly Obama, in his relations with Putin, there were clear hints of this. I don't think this is the major issue. And notice how careful Putin is to emphasize that Russia itself is a multinational country. And he speaks in other places about the sympathy Russia historically has had for the position of Black Americans. But he's well aware of all of these things, and he's worried about it.
And we'll close out the stream soon and get to the super chats. But
Yeah.
Peter, didn't they use Russia? What am I trying to say? Didn't they use that in the Sochi Olympics against them going to the
I think
with the LGBTQ community? Wasn't that used by the media to hammer Russia?
Okay, you can look at the Sochi Games. Russia is the homophobic Russia, okay,
Yes.
which is absurd. People in Russia are very conservative, okay?
Yes.
And homosexuality is not talked much about, but it doesn't mean it's being demonized, not at all, okay? It's just something that most people don't prefer to talk about. Then with the World Cup in 2018, the Russian team is too white.
Yeah.
Well, it had Ukrainian, Tartar, Uzbek. I mean, it had everything from nationalities. What is it now? It's like 162 nationalities. I don't even know the number. There are so many in Russia. Okay, and when you walk the streets of Moscow or any other major city or town, you're not even aware of someone's ethnic background. It's all over the map here, okay?
Yes.
It's the Russian culture and it's the Russian language that brings everyone together. No one in this country where I reside is denied expression of their nationality. Not one person, but they identify with Russian culture and Russian civilization. It's not an ethnic category. It is a cultural, societal category. Okay?
Absolutely.
They don't think in terms of ethnicity here.
No.
Some people do. There are racists here too. Okay, let's be fair. But average people think in terms of the culture, not of their ethnicity.
But my point is that it has been used already. It was
Absolutely.
used in Sochi. It was used at the World Cup. So the mainstream media, the neocons, the neoliberals, Obama, his White House, they used it to demonize another country, to demonize its leader, to brand their leader as a racist and a homophobe, which they did, and they did it effectively. I mean, everyone in this live stream understands the tricks that they use. But if you go out on the street and you talk to the average, I'm sure the average American, the average person in the UK, and say something, like, oh, I like Putin, they'll go, oh my God, that guy, he hates gays and he hates homosexuals and he's repressive. My point is that these tricks have been used against Russia. There's no doubt Putin understands it. There's no doubt the Russian government understands it. There's no doubt other countries understand it. For example, Orban and maybe Salvini in Italy understand these tricks and tactics. But now we're seeing these tricks and tactics being used in the United States. And I think that's alarming, for a leader like Putin to see this, like you guys said, coming home and disrupting the entire country. I mean, that's my point. These were effective. We have to admit that. They used it and they used it effectively.
Absolutely, no question. And they use it extremely effectively at the time of the Sochi Olympics. And they still use it if you look at newspapers like The Guardian, for example. And I'm sure this is true in the United States also. I mean, obviously, I'm less exposed to what the US says about Russia there. But clearly, they use these memes all the time about Russia being this reactionary, racist, authoritarian, homophobic society. And it is none of those things. I mean, Peter says Russians don't like to talk about homosexuality. My experience is Russians don't like to talk about sex.
Yeah, true.
It's not a subject that they like to talk about at all.
Yeah, they just don't talk about it.
They don't. They do it, absolutely. Of course they do. But as I said, it's something that, they are embarrassed when people ask them to talk about it. I mean, it isn't something that is part of their society at all. But that is exactly how they've been painted. And they are, obviously, the Russians are clearly extremely aware of the fact that people in the West are misrepresenting them in that particular way. By the way, I just wanted to finish with something else that Putin said.
Why do they misrepresent them, though, Alex? That's what I want to get to. Why do you misrepresent someone?
It gives them a reason to demonize, and it shows that their own virtue, how they're better, and that you have to get rid of Putin, and that'll free the gays.
Yes, but it's also a feedback loop, because then you could say, well, you see all these wicked people in America, these white supremacists, these outright people, they're all being backed by Putin. So that way you are then able to use Putin to claim that the people in the United States that you are attacking, who you are labeling, you're putting these labels upon them, are somehow part of Putin's, evil master plan.
Including
Trump. So it cuts both ways. You are able to, you damn the Russians this way, and you damn your opponents within your own country in that way.
Susan Rice just 2 weeks ago? Oh, these riots, it's all part of Putin's playbook.
Yes. Can I just say, because I just wanted to come back to that interview, because this is another thing that Putin said, and this again may surprise some of our American viewers. About these are comments that, as I said, Putin made in a Russian domestic TV broadcast, and he says, "I hope that in the long run, the fundamental bases of American democracy will make it possible for this country, for this country to emerge from the time of crisis it is now living through. Putin stressed, adding that the United States is a very strong democratic power. So this is his actual view of the United States, so profoundly different from the way it is represented or misrepresented in the United States itself by the very people that we're talking about.
The New York Times will forget to publish that when they criticize it. They won't throw that in there.
Absolutely, and as I said, it's you can find it all in TASS, 14th Monday, June 14th, just 5 days ago. So it's a recent interview, and you can see all the things that Putin said there. And to come back to what you were saying, Alex, as far as he is concerned, all these things are connected together. I mean, that is very much
an article, and we'll close it out, Alexander.
Yeah.
And I want both of your thoughts on this. You wrote an article, Alexander, I believe a year and a half ago, on how the Western mainstream media, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Western mainstream media dehumanized Russians.
Yes, that's
correct.
Right.
You did
absolutely.
Are they not using the same tricks and tactics right now on their own people in the United States and in the UK? Those same tactics to dehumanize them, to humiliate them, to make them live in fear. You wrote this article about what they were doing to Russians and the reason they were doing it. Are there no parallels?
There are many parallels. I mean,
is Putin not seeing the parallels? Go
well,
ahead,
of course, well, of course he is. Well, of course he is. I mean, I'll give an example. I was reading an article about, in The Guardian about white, always, they say white working class attitudes in Britain. And of course, the way the white working class is represented in Britain, which used to be, by the way, the bedrock of support for the British Labour Party, is just extraordinary. And has, to my knowledge, because, I've had to give my, previous work, I've had many interconnections with white working class people. It bears no relationship to the way in which these people are, really are. I mean, they're being labeled as something which they are not. And of course, you see this happening. You see this in Britain, you see this in the United States, and you see this with Russia too. And of course, this is something that alarms Putin. Not just Putin, I mean, Russians. It should alarm all of us, actually, because people should never be labeled and stereotyped in that incredible way. And the article that you are referring to, it was a bit longer than that, it was slightly older than that, but it was about the stereotyping of Russians, the way Russians are always represented in Western television, in Western films, in Western books, in a particular way. Russian women are always, sexually loose and prostitutes. Russian men are gangsters. Russians are violent. Russians are dishonest. Russians are corrupt. All these memes that are represented, and we see memes being represented too about white people in the United States and in Britain, that they're racists, all of them, that they are prejudiced, that they have, privilege. All of these things are being stereotypically applied to them in exactly the same way. But that's where we are now, and it's not a good place.
Peter, closing thoughts.
Well, exactly. I mean, again, this is this neoliberal ideology. I mean, it first of all, it has no limits. It doesn't delimit itself. Okay, and it will always be looking to expand, and it happens internationally, obviously. And I mean, just look at the the recent last couple of days new sanctions on Syria. I mean, you're just left without any words how cruel it is against the people of Syria. The US lost its bid in Syria, so the Syrian people must be punished for it. And this neoliberal ideology applies at home as well. I mean, for me, it's just so very obvious is that Black Lives Matter, all white people are racist, all police are racist. I mean, go to the American South. There are police commissioners, police commissioners that are Black. There are mayors that are Black. I mean, institutionally, they're represented. You can't just turn around and say it's all white people's fault. I mean, these cities are just really badly run. But that serves the mandarins of power. Get these people, get everybody fighting everybody, get everyone distrusting everyone. And you know what? The stock market will go just fine, okay? That's exactly what is happening, okay? Is that the rich and powerful of their interests are secured, okay? And let everybody else squabble among themselves, okay? I mean, this whole political correctness thing, wokeism, doesn't change the quality of life of anybody in the working class, okay, at all. And this is really a very cynical policy that's being played out in the United States. And neoliberalism's approach to the international system. They have their right to run it, okay? They hate international law, they hate conventions, and that's why they keep skirting it. They hate arms control, okay? They want complete maneuverability. They want it internationally and they want it at home.
All right, guys. Let's go to super chats. Is there any final?
No, I mean, just to quickly point out that, I mean, American white working class Americans, they're declining life expectancy, apparently more problems piling up around them. Very difficult to see any signs of privilege there. Look, so why go after
about
those
the
people?
opiate crisis?
Well, exactly.
It's obviously multicultural. There are all kinds of people from all over the world. So. Yeah. Let me ask someone that supports Black Lives Matter, okay? Then why are Asians so amazingly successful in the United States? I thought all white people were racist. Why are so many Latino people so amazingly successful in the United States? The entrepreneurship, it's in their DNA. They're very successful. How can they be successful in a racist country? How can Asians be successful in a racist country? And why do people from Somalia and Ethiopia do wonderful in the United States? Oh, because they don't carry the baggage of their oppression. No, they weren't oppressed in the United States. As a matter of fact, they prosper in the United States, okay? This whole narrative is absolutely ridiculous, all right? And defund the police, get rid of the police. Who is that gonna hurt the most? The weak, the most vulnerable, poor people. They're gonna get the brunt of it. Because everyone that seems to support that lives in a gated community with cameras all around and their private security. Yeah. This is a con. It's a huge con.
All right. Great discussion, guys. Let's get to some really good questions that we have lined up. So Valias, once again, thank you, Valias, for that $20 super chat. Thank you, Tim PZ, for that $10 super chat. Tori Goodhell is a new member of the Duran community. Welcome. Flying Boar, $5 super chat. What Russia thinks of BLM and Antifa? Do they have any groups like that there? Good question. Any groups like that in Russia?
But you could count them on your fingers. I mean, there'd be no protests similar at all. I know Misuse, which is a anti-government Russian website, which is backed by Hodorkovsky, by the way, who is one of an exiled oligarch, has been trying to stir up some things like that, but it's gained absolutely no traction.
Okay, thank you for that super chat from Brian, a €10 super chat. Thank you.
Into that. It doesn't get any traction here because people don't think in those categories.
No.
They just don't. It's completely alien. As I've said before on these podcasts, the only racists are Russian liberals. They're the ones that are racist because they want to be part of what they call the European tradition, though they probably know nothing about what that is. I mean, they're absolutely foolish people, and they're blinders on them. It's really extraordinary. But the people that I have communication with on a daily basis, the housing boom continues in Moscow, even through the pandemic here. And yes, a lot of the migrant workers come from the stands, okay? But if they speak Russian reasonably well, they follow the law, no one's gonna bother them, no one, okay? I mean, but it's not an ethnic difference. People feel a class difference, okay? Yes. And that's, people feel that. But, if you want to say Russia for Russians, most people say, well, what do you mean by that? Okay, well, it just wouldn't penetrate. That is an empty phrase. It doesn't make any sense because the intermarrying of people over the centuries in this country, everybody's got a little bit of Ukrainian, everybody's got a little bit of Polish, and maybe a little bit of Kazakh, and it's all a mixture. And so you couldn't really pull that off here. And the reason why you couldn't pull it off, because people don't know what it means.
Yeah. And people like Navalny, just to make it clear, who is supported by the West, he's a big xenophobe. I mean, he does not like foreign elements at all. Yeah,
absolutely,
so
completely true.
He's not a liberal hero by any means.
No. I mean, he's absolutely not. I mean, he's probably, I don't know what he thinks about these events, but he's, but I know, absolutely true. But I mean, it's exactly the point that Peter was making. If you want to look for people with those kind of views, then you will find them amongst the so-called liberals, not amongst more conservative Russians who don't think in those terms. The point to stress about Navalny is outside Moscow, he has virtually no support. And within Moscow, he has very little. Most of his supporters, in my experience, you will find in the West, especially in the media in the West.
A lot of his supporters in Russia aren't even old enough to vote.
Well, indeed.
Let alone, and they're not old enough even to shave. Okay.
All right. Good point. All right. From Brian, a €10 super chat. Thank you, Brian, for that. From Momo 199. Love Team Duran. Thank you. From Hong Kong. Love from Hong Kong. Thank you very much for that. Our love to Hong Kong as well. From Jan Iwanik, £5 super chat. Another one from Jan, £2 super chat. From Akarnan Kappa, £5 super chat. Thank you very much. From John Cheeseman, $5 super chat. I really appreciate your comments on world affairs. Thank you very much. From Jan Iwanik again, a £1 super chat. Thank you very much, Jan. From Dolce Periculum, a $2.50 super chat. Spot on, guys. Thanks. Thank you very much for that. From Valies, a $20 super chat. Good question. What advice would you give Trump? Question mark. So what advice would you give Trump?
Oh, it's a huge question.
Well, let's put it into context. I imagine Valies is saying right now, and given everything that's going on, tough times. What would be the one thing you would tell them to focus in on?
What would be the one thing to focus on? I would take the battle to the Democrats. I would point out how absolutely divisive they are. I mean, they're constantly talking about how divisive he has been. The people who are being divisive are the Democrats, not him. It is they who refuse to accept his election. It is they who are supporting lawlessness in America's streets. It is they who are disrupting the economy. It is they who have been, supporting lawbreaking. That is what I would personally do. And if we're talking about, people like Bolton, I would point out the hypocrisy of their supporting Bolton. And last but not least, I would advise him to do that which he is now going to do, which is to go out amongst these people and go back to those rallies, because he lost touch to a great extent with the American people by the fact that he confined himself to the White House. So I would go on the attack. I would keep focused on Biden and his weaknesses, and I would fight it all the way. Mm-hmm.
Peter, if you had Trump's ear, what would you tell him?
I would tell him to go back to his instincts and his gut feeling and just jettison all of these old thinking GOP operatives. Just tell them he needs to, in very much the same vein that Alexander McCarris was saying, he needs to take any kind of stimulus or aid directly to the people. Don't let McConnell dictate it in the Senate. He needs to get out in front of it. And I fault him for not getting out in front. I fault him for getting behind Fauci. It's just absurd. I'll never understand that, okay? No. And he needs to get on national television and saying that this is the equivalent of war, and middle class people and small entrepreneurs, I'm here, I got your back. The IRS can do it. The infrastructure is already there. They can take your money, they can send you money back, okay? Mm-hmm. And I would announce a Marshall Plan to save middle America. He will get reelected. You know why? Because blacks and Hispanics and Asians and everyone else will vote for that, because that's a pocketbook issue. And I'm just befuddled why he doesn't do that. He can use the bully pulpit and get to the left of Biden and just go straight to the people. Stop letting the Republican Party get in your way. They don't like you, Mr. President. No. They don't care if you're reelected. They don't. A handful of them do, and they get on TV all the time, and they do a great job. But, you know, Mr. President, you did it yourself. Now do it again and get straight to the people. Stop letting all these filters get in your way. I'm really adamant about that. It's not because I'm a Trump lover, no, because I see an ailing middle class that needs help, and the Democrats won't do it. The GOP won't get off their ass and do it. The president needs to do this, and that will make a difference. And you know what? All of this BML stuff and all of this writing stuff, people will put that to a side. We need to rebuild the economy, and not for the rich, but for the middle class. And I think it would work.
There you go, Trump. If you're listening, that's the advice that we're giving you. So just get in touch with me and I will invoice you for that advice. And Valley, yes, I'll split those proceeds with you because you came up with the question. From Arkarnan Kappa, is Maria Zakharova going to Athens as ambassador?
I've heard this. I saw a report of this, I think, in Greece, but I've not actually seen it confirmed on any Russian channels. So we'll just see.
I hope not.
That would be awesome.
Well, it'd be awesome for us. I think also it would have the effect in Greece of having a diplomat there who could counter Jeffrey Pyatt, who is the American ambassador, who has gained an enormous amount of influence, and you know he's a very, very powerful manipulator. So it would put a strong voice in in Athens, to sort of counter him. I think that also, looking at it from her personal point of view, she's been the foreign ministry spokesman for quite a long time now. I mean, she might be wanting to do something else, but I also have to say, she is an outstanding foreign ministry spokesman, and it would be a very, very difficult act to follow if she really is going.
Yeah, she is welcome to come to Athens, Maria Zakharova. Please come. Toilet Sauce, 10 euros super chat. What do you make of the timing of this article? It obviously comes shortly before the postponed Victory Day parade. It also comes at a time when a color revolution seems to be staged in Belarus.
Well, this is...
Belarus is having elections.
Yes, it is having election. I'm not convinced that there will be a color revolution in Belarus, actually. I mean, I saw that. There was an article, I think, on the Moon of Alabama about all of this, which took a number of stray things together and I think made perhaps more of them than one should do. So I do think there's going to be a color revolution in Belarus. I think much more likely this article was produced now for some of the reasons that I said. We've also discussed on this program. I think one trigger, one thing that has infuriated not just Putin, but many, many people in Russia, was this extraordinary European Parliament resolution equating Russia and Germany as the two countries responsible for the start of the Second World War. I mean, that has annoyed Putin personally a lot. It's annoyed the Russians a lot, and that has triggered a lot of historical commentary coming out of Russia now. But as I said, ultimately, and as Peter said, this is all about contemporary situation, about the world we live in now, looking at the situation of the United States, looking at the situation internationally, and setting out Russia's views.
You know, the amazing thing is, I really want everyone to keep this in mind. You know, up until a couple of years ago, this was all settled history.
Yes.
With Russian historians, Western historians, this was settled.
Yes.
It was settled. I mean, we've mentioned it many times, but go back, I think it was 1971, the World at War series that came out in the UK, which is one of the greatest documentaries ever made. That was settled history as well.
Yes.
This was settled. And now you're politicizing it. This is historical thinking. Ahistorical, okay? This is a political gambit that is in opposition to historical records and basically historical consensus.
Yes, if you want to read a good, in fact, an outstanding short history book by an academic historian on the run-up to the Second World War, the origins of the Second World War, I would still recommend A.J.P. Taylor's The Origins of the Second World War, written in 1962. And that will show you how settled this history is. I mean, it really is. And about the injustice and unsustainability of the Versailles system, I still think E.H. Carr's book, written before the Second World War, I think it was called The World Crisis, I've forgotten its title, is still actually essential reading. And of course, there was Maynard Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, you know, the economic consequences of the peace, written at Versailles itself. So when Peter says this is settled history, it absolutely is. It is settled history from long ago. And all of these events that we are seeing are now being rewritten, just as the history of the United States is being written as we're talking about. I've heard, by the way, just as we've been doing this program, that a statue of George Washington in Portland has been taken down.
Right.
Actually, another book
Expected.
about the Versailles settlement is a book, I don't remember the author's name, but The Kings Depart, which is a really, really interesting book about all of the world leaders that were involved in the Versailles settlement. And it's a really interesting concluding paragraph on how everyone that touched that, the creation, ended up being falling out of power, going into obscurity. Everyone that touched that agreement was a loser. One nice thing to my two Greek friends here, the Greek representative at Versailles was that guy was he was a real piece of work. I mean, for a small country, that guy really got people wound up. I don't remember the guy's name, but
Venizelos.
Yeah. What a colorful character. Oh my God.
Yeah. My grandfather was his secretary, by the way.
He walked around like he was, you know, the US, UK, and France all wrapped into one.
Absolutely.
You'll find many statues of him all around Greece. That's for
Absolutely.
sure. And many streets named after him.
Absolutely.
All right. And Spartan Warrior Queen, by the way, thank you very much for moderating once again. We really appreciate it. You're doing a great job. You're helping out a lot. So a shout out to Spartan Warrior Queen. From Lori Chamberlain, a 10-pound super chat. Love your shows. I would love to live in Russia. Thank you very much.
It's actually a very, very pleasant place to live now, actually. I certainly, without qualification, I say that. Peter can confirm it. He lives there.
My job is to follow the news and analysis. I can tell you with absolute conviction, I like sitting in a part of Moscow that is clean and modern and quiet. So I have a nice little perch to watch the outside world. I'm just horrified by what I'm saying. And you know why? What's even more, because it's all self-inflicted. All of this is unnecessary. It's unnecessary to do it. A statue to George Washington. Okay, I mean, you said it, Alexander, Christopher, in our last podcast. They all want to go back to year zero. But you know what? Every time they try it, ends up being a disaster.
Not going to end well. It is not going to end well. From Patricia Klein, a 20-pound super chat. This is my donation for Alex Christopher's green screen library backup. Love you guys. The only sanity online.
It's real.
It's real. There it is. Real books. Real books and paintings, real paintings too, guys. So thank you very much, Patricia, for that. From Ratch G, $10 super chat. Australia is supposedly suffering cyber attacks on various entities. And of course, the right wants to blame China. I suspect another false flag.
Well,
I read that article too. They're blaming China. They're also throwing the blame a little bit on Russia as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it's always the enemy now, isn't it? It's China and Russia that are behind the cyber attacks. No one else does cyber attacks. There are no cyber criminals. There are no people who do these kind of things. I mean, yeah. It's the narrative we always hear. I mean, anything that goes wrong anywhere now, it's always when it's now the hand of Moscow.
Didn't
and it's
Obama
also the hand
hack
of Beijing.
Merkel?
Well, of course he did.
Hack Merkel?
Of course he did. Absolutely.
I have the perfect answer to all of these things. You know, Russia's meddling, Russia's hacking, Russia's doing this, Russia's doing that. I have the perfect reply, and it works under all occasions. I just say, where are the Skripals?
Yeah.
In New Zealand.
Well, except that the government of New
In
Zealand, the government of New Zealand says they know nothing about it, and I understand that they're extremely annoyed by the claims that have been coming out of London that they are in New Zealand, and they've been saying informally that they're definitely not in New Zealand. So there we go.
Well, if there's our viewers in New Zealand, if you happen to snap a picture of the Scripples, send it to us first. We got the scoop on that story.
Absolutely.
From Patricia Klein, 20-pound super chat. Who do you really think is behind BLM Antifa? Corsi thinks it's Putin via Soros. Putin via Soros.
Well, that would be an extraordinary. I mean, I've heard of some extraordinary combinations, but that one really makes the head reel. I mean, no, it is not Putin.
No, not Putin. Putin via Soros. Putin behind George Soros, who is behind.
Oh goodness. Oh well, I mean, this is too crazy. I mean, it is absolutely. I mean, that's a crazy theory. I mean, clearly there are structural problems in the United States, of that there's no doubt, and there's obviously combustible material that some people are using. But we've discussed this in our programs. Undoubtedly, these protests are being manipulated. Undoubtedly, these protests are being organized. To a certain extent, there is money behind them. Antifa is definitely an organization, despite people saying that it isn't. And undoubtedly, some of that money is coming from people like the gentleman who have just been named. So
and Tom Steyer.
And Tom Steyer and all sorts of people.
And all the other American oligarchs. That
absolutely.
Is perfectly for them. Look, 10 million here, 20 million there. I mean, that doesn't affect their bottom line at all. As a matter of fact, they get to brand themselves as being with the resistance, okay? I have bad news for Nike. I mean, you can give all the money you want to Black Lives Matter, but they're still the rioters are still gonna loot your stores. So I mean, you're not gonna get protection from, but I mean, from a virtue signaling vantage point, of course, they wanna be quote unquote part of the resistance. That's, and it's a very cynical thing because Amazon, why don't you unionize your workers? Why don't you stop treating them like serfs? No. I mean, the hypocrisy stinks to heaven.
Absolutely.
All right. From Smedley Butler III, $5 super chat. Collectivism by fiat currency is the virus. Individualism by sound money is the cure.
Well, I'm a great believer in sound money, and I look upon all these experiments with printing money with absolute horror, and I'm sure that it will end badly. The Russians absolutely do not do that, by the way. They have positive real interest rates, low debt, and the idea of printing money, well, all that happened in the very recent past, and they are absolutely determined never to go back there. And I never could have conceived before 2008 that I would ever see it happen in the United States.
All right, from Sparky, a $5 super chat. Chickens coming home to roost. Same tactics used by the U.S. and global intel plus evil non-GMOs in other countries are turned back towards the USA.
Absolutely, and it's the same people who are involved in both. They have been empowered to use these tools in other countries, and they're now very powerful in the United States, and they're using those same tools that they've used elsewhere in the United States itself now in order to shape its politics. But that inevitably happens. That is how it always happens in countries. I mean, if you go back to ancient Rome, all those Roman generals who were going around the world conquering the world for Rome eventually came back with their armies and they conquered Rome, and it was the end of the Republic. Now, the United States is not where Rome is, but they need to learn these warnings, and they need to be act very decisively, I think, if the Republican system in the United States is to be preserved.
Okay, from toilet. Yep.
They're determined to destroy it. I mean, who do you call when someone's breaking in your house? Don't call the police because they don't exist. Okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, for me, I keep doing a lot of crosstalks on this. I will do it on Monday as well. Is that, what is legitimate authority now? The very fact that we have to ask that question means you're in really deep trouble. Okay. If it isn't obvious to you, you're in a dangerous place.
Okay, from Toilet Sauce, a 50 euro super chat. Thank you very much for that super chat. Toilet Sauce, at a time when Zelensky demands full EU membership, when the leader of Donetsk says that his country is already fully integrated into the Russian Federation, when Russia is preparing to adopt amendments to its constitution to assert its sovereignty.
Yeah. All of this,
Toilet Sauce was, I think it was Toilet Sauce that sent us the first super chat about the timing of this essay.
Absolutely,
I
absolutely.
think it's a follow up on.
Yeah, and he's right. And all of these things, as you rightly as we say, are connected. And he's absolutely right. This essay has been very carefully judged for its timing. It's both a message and a history lesson and a warning.
Well said. Sparky, $5 super chat. BLM BS gives protesters a grievance. Limited hangout by their true enemy, the globalists. Forget
Yes.
BLM and put on a yellow vest.
I completely agree. Yes. I mean, there's a
BLM
lot.
and put
There's
on
so
yellow
much.
vests. Yeah.
There is so much to protest about in the United States and in the West. To protest legally, by the way, and peacefully and democratically. One of the most effective ways you can protest is by exercising your vote properly. And you've got a chance to do that in November. But, you know, the United States needs to look, the people of the United States need to approach these things as a united people, looking at these problems, looking at what we are seeing here is an attempt to divide them and play them off against each other. And the only people who benefit from that is this cartel of oligarchs, this cabal of oligarchs, who are benefiting from the existing system. The people who Peter absolutely rightly says, if you can't call a policeman, they're not bothered because they live in gated communities, in virtual fortresses, and if they have their helicopters ready, if there's ever any trouble.
Right.
Yeah, because
Yep.
Saigon right now, 1975.
Well, indeed.
From Momo, glory to Hong Kong. Love to Hong Kong. Thank you very much, Momo, for that super chat. From Sparky, Robert pulled a 45 on Dad back in 85. Dad drew his 38 special and put 5 rounds in him. Liberal reporter kept asking him, would you have shot him if he was white? Dad answered, he was white.
Well, there you go.
Thank you very much, Sparky, for that super chat. No comments. Blue Diamond Gem, $1.99. Super chat, $2 is all I have. Broke teen, love your content. Thank you very much, Blue Diamond Gem, for that super chat. We appreciate it. From Flying Boar, $5 super chat. Putin should ban BLM and Antifa. I'm sure he's not going to let any.
I'm sure not. I mean,
even though Antifa is an international.
Yes, I mean, there is a law now in Russia about NGOs, which is that, of course, if an NGO wants to establish itself in Russia and gets foreign funding, then it must register as a foreign agent. Now, I cannot imagine that Antifa or BLM, which would clearly find themselves within that, within that umbrella, would want to do that. So I don't think you will find them present in Russia in any significant way, and they're certainly not, as I say, going to get much traction there.
All right, from Sparky, $5 super chatism was no longer significant in the US by 2008. Globalists and their minions in the media and education stirred it back up. Divide and conquer. Yeah, very true. Yeah. Very true. Well said. From Saint Longinus, $5 super chat. Have you done a video on the Federal Reserve System yet and their latest actions?
We should do.
When
so
can
many
we expect
videos.
that one?
We should do. I mean, we now have a situation where there were people within the Federal Reserve System who talk about infinite QE. I mean, which is a mathematical impossibility, by the way. I mean, that is impossible. So, I mean, it is very alarming that people within the Wall Street world, that world, are talking in this fashion. And we also need to understand. And this has become very clear recently. And I've been speaking to people who are involved in Wall Street. I mean, I know people in that world. There is an intimate connection between the Federal Reserve, the Wall Street, financial people, and the high-tech companies. They form a group, and that's where power in the United States now lies.
Yeah, but with the infinite quantitative easing, I mean, it's really obvious. I mean, really what it is that you give so much liquidity that with people that already have so much wealth that they use that to acquire more assets. The dollar value isn't important anymore because quantitative easing negates that. And so what you do is you get this liquidity and you want to unload it because you know it's paper, okay? And so you buy an asset, okay?
Yes, sir.
The asset itself has value, okay? And so it's just to get rid of this, the more liquidity that's put in there, the more the people that have the power to move that liquidity around, they instantly turn it into assets. You're going to see that over the next 6 months. We're going to see a consolidation of chain stores, all kinds of businesses like courier services, snatch them all up because they have, as an asset, they have value. Okay.
Yes.
Think of it in terms of its cash value. Okay.
Yes.
And another thing is that you destroy competition. Okay. That's what you want to do.
That's exactly what it is. I mean,
Amazon wants to buy anything that moves goods around because then you wipe out competition, okay? And you consolidate your monopoly.
Yes.
So the cash that's something that, you know, they want to unload as soon as possible and buy land, for example, because Alexander, Christopher, and you and I have talked about many times about Greece. I mean, at least the land itself in Greece has value, okay? And it's an asset, it's real. And so buying real assets this is the game to play right now.
All right. From John Iwanik, 10 pound super chat. Polish people know that Germany and the USSR invaded us together. We often ignore the wider context, which you discuss here. Can anything be done to normalize the relationship between Poland and Russia?
Yeah, I have a great affection for Poland, and I am quite sure that in time, all of these situations between Poland and Russia will resolve themselves and that the two countries will become friends. I think this is only a question of time now. There is a period at the moment when I think a lot of Polish people still feel very embittered by the experience of communism, and there are also, you know, forces in Poland brought in from outside, dare I say, which have wanted to fan this conflict and these historic grievances. But I've also seen the way Polish people and Russian people interact with each other. In both, you know, I've got both Polish friends and Russian friends, and I know Polish people in in London and Russian people in London, and they get on extremely well. And they very rapidly discover that they have lots of things in common. I mean, both the two great Slavic nations. So I am sure it will happen. I think the Russians are ready for it. They would absolutely be very happy for Poland to adopt a policy of, you know, reconciliation with Russia. I think the present Polish government has lots of issues which it needs to work out, but that those will eventually work themselves out. So I'm very positive about this, and I'm sure it will come.
France and Germany have reconciled. Russia
Yes.
and Poland can reconcile.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
from Smiley Big, $5 super chat. Are globalists using CV like they used ISIS? It keeps coming back when they need it. Is lockdown, and number two, is lockdown developing a snitch culture useful for globalists?
Well, it is. I mean, can I just say something? I mean, this is, again, extremely annoying to me because, again, Donald Trump said something that's absolutely true. And I've been harping on this. I'm becoming boring on the subject because I repeat about this. The more you test for CV, the more CV you will find. The US is doing more tests than any other country. The second country that does the most CV tests is Russia, by the way. Those are the two leaders. The United States is now doing so many CV tests that it is finding more CV. Donald Trump correctly said that. What does Fauci immediately and instantly do? He goes on television and he contradicts him. Why does Trump allow this to happen all the time? I simply do not understand. I really do not understand. But that the United States is finding more cases of CV at the moment is not a sign that there is more CV in the United States. It is a sign that the testing system is working there. It's a point that I have discussed so often. I'm sorry if, as I said, I'm getting boring about it.
All right. From Mad Marxists, $2 super chat just to say hello. And I enjoy the Duran very much. And and going back to the previous question, is lockdown developing a snitch culture useful for globalists? Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Of course it is.
It's very useful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Of course it is.
From Life of Brian, $4.99 super chat OT, but I get the feeling that there is no such thing as left populism. Left populism runs miles downstream from wokeness. Left populism runs miles downstream from wokeness.
If you're talking about left populism, it doesn't exist. And a genuine left of the kind that I used to remember in Europe doesn't exist either. I mean, we have something that masquerades and uses its symbols, but it doesn't have any real reality anymore. The left that I used to remember was all about supporting working class people. Why do they care about them anymore?
Well, I think in the United States, I think the Sanders movement is left.
Yeah, okay. But we don't have.
The thing is that I criticize the Bernie bros is they let too much wokeism in. They let it seep in, and I think that is very, very detrimental. Because the thing about right populism, particularly in the United States, is that, and actually I agree with it, is that what's really toxic on the right is libertarianism. That is very vile stuff, and conservatives need to move away from that. In their mantras about the market will correct itself, capitalism will always overcome difficulties. No, I mean, I as a conservative have no problem with government intervention in the economy. Help poor people during this pandemic. Make sure salaries are paid. I mean, that's not a permanent thing. It's an emergency thing. I mean, too many conservatives are wedded to these ideological strictures, and they have to leave them behind. People, right-wing populists, are saying, culture is very, very important to us, but we see we see economic tools that are available to us that are somehow taboo. They're not taboo. They're not taboo. Okay, and I think the best right-wing populists, they're the ones that are flexible on the economy, but they keep a very strong hold on their values, cultural values. And I think that's a winning proposition. It's just that too many people in the GOP are just wedded to the old way of doing things. And because they're wedded to doing the things in the old way, they block Trump.
All right, from Flying Boar, $5 super chat. There was a bill in Congress recently, and it was to label Russia a state sponsor of terrorism.
Yes.
Yes,
absolutely. Of course there is. And I understand that there are increasing moves in Congress to impose even more sanctions on Russia.
All right.
So that's where we are.
There you go. As if they don't have other problems. Anyway, Life of Brian. Yeah. Life of Brian, $4.99. The typical lefty will not trade a penny of wokeness for 10 pounds of economy.
True. Mm-hmm. Completely true.
Thank you for that super chat, Life of Brian. Mad Marxists, jail corrupt bankers and politicians bring. Jail corrupt bankers and politicians.
Well, let's have the rule of law, okay? Yeah. And have it applied equally, okay? That's what we need to have, okay? This is the breakdown of legitimate order, is that they're two-tiered, three-tier justice systems, and this is very corrosive on society.
Yes.
All right. I mean, I don't want to drag up Russiagate again, but I will. I mean, Roger Stone was convicted of lying to the FBI. Well, the FBI lied to the FBI. Why aren't they being prosecuted? I mean, average people see this, okay? They see this all the time. They're not like us. We're news junkies. We watch what's going on all of the time. That's what we do, and I hope it's a service to people. But average people, maybe they're working. Hopefully, they have a job, and maybe they're not getting enough hours. They have to worry about feeding their family, clothing themselves. And then when you click on the news and you just see, well, Roger Stone and Julian Assange. How can you have a conference on media freedom in London and just down the street you have a political prisoner that was practicing journalism and nobody wants to talk about it? Okay, that was the same media conference that RT was refused credentials.
Yeah.
Okay, from Corey in 1995, £5 super chat. Racism is not an issue. Minorities need to get over their victim mentality or just leave. Will we ever achieve equality? Will we ever achieve equality?
Well, not in the way the United States is going at the moment. This is not going to achieve equality.
Equality of law for everyone, you'll never get there. And again, can someone explain to me why so many brown people want to crawl across the border to live in racist America? Can someone explain that to me? Okay, if it is such a racist place, why do so many people want to immigrate there? Because it's not.
That'll be a good question for Jordan Peterson. Will we ever achieve equality? I think he's answered questions like that before. Come to mind anyway. I'll look at some old videos of his, because I think that's a question that he's gotten many times. Do you want to say something, Alexander?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I mean, equality before the law is not what these people who are protesting in the United States are seeking. What they want is themselves to be privileged under the law. So that is not the way you achieve equality, certainly not equality before the law. They're against it.
They're against it. From Sparky, $5 super chat, around 1970, having a SWAT team.
Hang on here, that's so true, because what has happened, and it came from the universities, is that everything is focused on privileges, and different privileges for different groups of people, where they're divided and labeled, okay? But what is significantly absent in our conversation over the last 40 years, but particularly the last few years with this wokeism nonsense, is that nobody talks about responsibility, okay? Because privileges and responsibility are a binary. And what they're trying to do is to separate privilege from responsibility, okay? And that is why everything is getting short-circuited, okay? Where in CHOP, only Black physicians can treat Black patients. Well, what wokeism does is essentially promote segregation.
Yes.
Okay, that is the great achievement. While Alexander Makiris and I were very, very young, but that was the greatest achievement of our lifetime, was the end, speaking as an American, the end of Jim Crow in the South, okay, to end segregation. Now what this is doing, it is promoting segregation.
Yes. Yes.
Responsibility and accountability would be nice. Sparky, $5 super chat. Around 1970, having a SWAT team was controversial. Thought was it was a slippery slope and police would become too militarized. It came true.
Yes, absolutely. That is also true. The militarization of the police began in earnest under Barack Obama, by the way. Just saying.
Well, true. I'm very much against the militarization of the police. Okay, I really am. But is it no wonder? First of all, you have all of these failed foreign adventures, primarily in the Middle East. And what do you do with all that hardware? You give it or sell it at a discount to the police. Okay, so I mean, this is what they were made for: foreign wars, not made for American streets. Okay,
yeah,
I'm very much against it, and I've been listening to some very thoughtful podcasts over the last couple of weeks about the nature of policing, and I'm open to the conversation that when at least in the American context, if someone has an addiction problem, you call the police. If someone has a domestic violence issue, you call the police. I mean, what I'm saying is that I think an argument can be made that the police are not a one-size-fits-all operation, and maybe this could be with the same amount of money, not creating huge budgets, but maybe it should be more of a surgical approach to some of these problems here, okay? And I think I'm open to that. I'm open to learning more about that. Yeah. But having the police being one size fit all for everything, that's an interesting question to ponder, and I think it's worth learning more about.
Absolutely. Can I just make one quick added point? I mean, all the places where all these terrible things have been happening between police and people, where all, they are Democrat governed states. It's democratic governments who run the police in these states. And if there's militarization of police in these states, again, you have to look at the people who are in charge, who are people in the Democratic Party. So I am completely opposed to militarization of police. I believe the police should be close to the people. That is the way the police works best. when they have an understanding and a feel of the problems that the people who are being policed have. That doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen because certain state governments in the United States have chosen to take a different course.
Right, from Reckless Abandon, how does Trump prevent the usual snipers, which might appear at a major demonstration like the Maidan?
This is a great problem because, of course, as I understand it, the United States, with this very federal structure, it means that it can't, in fact, the president himself doesn't have the power to impose those kind of controls. So, you know, if you get provocateurs appearing and that kind of violence taking place, which please God it doesn't. I mean, I'd be horrified if something like that ever happened. But it's very difficult to see how Donald Trump can do anything about it. The people who have to stop it happening are the people in their communities themselves. If they see people who are violent and who are active in that kind of way, they need to stand up and speak out against it. That is what being in a democratic republic, that's what that's all about.
All right.
Trump has nothing to do with that. It's the governor and it's the mayor of cities.
Yeah. I just need to do it. Yeah.
Where the power and responsibility resides. So yeah, to have no mistake, it is a federalized system. So the governor of Washington can tell Trump to go to hell, and there are no repercussions. I mean, the people of Washington voted for the governor.
Okay, from Owen Smith, a 10-pound super chat. What would be the reaction if a BLM protest took place in Moscow or St. Petersburg?
Nobody would know what it was.
True, very true. Thank you very much for that super chat. Owen, from Flying Boar, update on Nord Stream 2. U.S. is threatening sanctions on companies. What's going to happen?
Man, it's going down very badly in Germany, even within the Christian Democratic Party of Germany. So I expect it will press, the Germans will press on with it. And for the first time that I know of, establishment, mainstream German politicians are talking about retaliatory sanctions on American companies.
Your dog is right there in the corner, Alexander.
He certainly is. He certainly is. Yes, he certainly is. He's getting very
I
anxious.
see him right there on the bottom left.
But anyway, he was just telling me, reminding me that he's here and he's keeping an eye on things, and he wants people on our viewers, no doubt, to see him too. But certainly that's the position with Nord Stream 2. So as I said, it is consolidating. These sanctions are consolidating German elite opinion against the US in a very strange way. I don't see how that helps the US at all. I think the US needs to just relax about Nord Stream 2, actually. Let it happen. It's not going to change anything, in any great way. It's not going to transform Europe. It's going to improve economic and commercial relations between Russia and Germany, but Germany will remain part of NATO. It won't even end, dare I say it, Western support for Ukraine, which will still continue until the situation in Ukraine itself becomes unsustainable. So as I said, the United States needs to just be a little more calm about this business and accept that it's going to happen and let it happen and stop worrying about it.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting the negative returns from it because particularly in Germany, I mean, the common sense position is, what does the United States have to do with Germany's energy security? Well, why should it be involved in that?
Exactly.
And there is no place for it. It just really this strong arming, bullying. That's all it is.
Yes, it's going down very badly in Germany at the moment, and I'm pretty in tune with views in Germany, so I mean I know what I'm saying. I mean this is not popular in Germany at all, and the fact that the US pulled out troops from Germany in the way it was done, I think many Germans would be happy to see fewer US troops in Germany, but in the way it was done without any kind of consultation, it all looked like a sulk. And at the same time as it's happening with Nord Stream 2, it hasn't gone down well.
Okay, from Sparky, $5 super chat. If government tries second wave COVID lockdown, they'll receive a collective one finger salute. Fewer deaths, if no action taken in the first place?
Well, I think what needs to happen is that the US needs to work hard on sorting out its contact tracing system. It's got a very well organized testing system. It is still behind on contact tracing. I'm sure it will get there, despite the many bureaucratic obstacles that are being put in the way. And if that is done, there will be no need for another lockdown. It won't be necessary, because that is the tried and tested way of dealing with this thing.
Okay, from John Cheeseman, can you see a top?
They try a lockdown, it will fail because they let the protests happen.
Well, indeed.
Right.
Well, I mean,
Exactly.
this is the other thing. I mean, they completely undermine their own lockdown
it's
and
been
their
blown
own
apart.
polls.
That's right.
It's been blown apart. I mean, they will never do it. I mean,
This goes back to the core issue that we started with.
Yeah.
This is the dissolving of legitimate authority.
Mm.
How can you tell people, after months and months of being locked? I mean, if you're locked in a small apartment, I mean, I'm lucky. I have grounds I can walk around. Okay, I mean, for me, this was an annoyance, but for other people, it was a real hardship. And then you can just turn on the TV. It's okay, to go protest, even loot. Okay, the pandemic, we'll put it on hold.
Yeah.
Okay?
I mean,
and now, but you have to go back now and follow the rules of social distancing. No, nobody in their right mind is going to believe that. You got to be out of your mind. You're crazy.
I happen to know, again, that there are lots of people in the medical world, at least in Britain, who are absolutely livid with that letter that was put out in the United States. And apparently there's an enormous amount of recrimination going on behind the scenes.
They don't say anything in front
They
of
have been intimidated into not doing it.
Well, yeah, I agree, but
yeah, there is
behind the scenes doesn't.
Well, I know, but as I said, it won't. You try and write about it in the Lancet, and you won't get published, and you might lose your job.
Yeah, but in
the that's the reality of the world we have.
Was it in the Lancet that published that
hydroxy
article about the coronavirus? I mean, and then they had to withdraw it. It was written by a hack.
Yeah, with the study on hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah.
Well, whatever. But I'm not. But I mean, you will not get this argument being played out. Though I happen to know, as I said, that there are lots of people who are extremely angry about this. But that's the kind of world we are when, as I said, we don't have debates any longer because people get censored. I mean, we saw what happened to certain websites, and we saw what happened to Zero Hedge. We saw what happened to the Federalist.
Yeah, agreed. John Cheeseman, $5 super chat. Can you see a time when the world says enough of you using sanctions, USA, we are going to trade whatever you say?
No, it's happening quickly. I mean, and in fact, the fact that we are seeing more and more sanctions being more and more indiscriminately applied over more and more crazy issues is in fact going to hasten that day, and is in itself a sign that the whole concept of sanctions is crumbling. I saw recently an article somewhere which compared the number of countries the United States was sanctioning in the year 2000 with the number of countries the US is sanctioning today, and it's just grown exponentially. It's just out of control. This whole process is out of control. The US is becoming sanctions addicted.
Yeah, but the obvious outcome of all this is to destroy the confidence in the dollar, because if you want to avoid the sanctions, then trade in your own currency. And that's more and more countries are doing, because sanctions, what they do, that where they get you is in the financial system that all goes through Western institutions. But if you're not trading in dollars, there's no way they can track what you're doing. So they're just hastening the end of the power of the dollar. It's complete lunacy. Okay?
I know. I'm going to say something. I think an important line has been crossed over at Nord Stream 2, because rightly or wrongly, the Germans regard Nord Stream 2 and gas supply from Russia as a vital economic interest for Germany. And now the United States, for the first time, is sanctioning one of its key allies, because that key ally is pursuing its own vital economic and commercial interests. When it was, imposing secondary sanctions on countries which traded with countries like Iran or Venezuela, which were of secondary importance to countries like Germany, the Germans grumbled about it, but they went along with it. But this time, as I said, it's cutting against Germany's vital interests, and they are furious about it, and they are for the first time talking about alternatives. So it was a very foolish thing to do.
All right, from Sparky, $5 super chat. Militant racist and left-wing hero, President Woodrow Wilson screwed up things for decades with his involvement in the Treaty of Versailles.
Completely agree. I mean, I think he was a disastrous president at many levels. He also brought the United States into the war, the First World War, in a very mendacious way. Peter.
Yeah, and he was the first president to institutionalize racism within the federal government.
Yes.
From Toilet Sauce, a €5 super chat. The point I was trying to make is that Putin was saying in his article, "You didn't listen to us then, you are not listening to us now."
Correct. That's entirely right. And he's made similar, he said things almost as simply as that on other occasions, Peter.
Yeah, the Munich Security Conference,
Yeah,
what was it, 2007, right? Yeah. He said this already.
Yes.
Yeah, he said it.
I mean,
all right.
absolutely. I mean, I have been sitting with Peter in a room at the SPIEF summit in St. Petersburg, and I heard him say that. I mean, I heard him say almost exactly as Toilet Sauce has just said it.
All right. From Sparky, $5 super chat. Millennials in the U.S. were taught from childhood that the U.S. is the root of all evil. They have no appreciation of the importance of freedom of speech.
Well, indeed. Well, can I also say, talk about the United States as the root of all evil? I was just reading just a moment ago about the toppling of the statue of Washington in Portland, and apparently it happened with burning an American flag. I mean, they wrapped an American flag around Washington's head, set it on fire, and then toppled the statue.
Yeah, but see, what's the, Again, I don't want to sound trite here. I mean, we all support peaceful protest. And, if we go look at the parallel of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, which was a righteous cause.
Yes.
Demanding that the country live up to its creed.
Yes.
Live up to the words etched in its constitution that all men are created equal.
Yes.
That was a noble endeavor.
Yes.
What is the nobility in what they're doing now?
No.
What is it? What do you want? No, all you want is destruction.
Yes.
Okay, that's what you want. This is a disease.
Yes.
Look at the rise of the working class in Europe in the late 19th and early 20th century. They had a list of demands like an 8-hour day, no child labor.
Yes.
Okay, I mean, the right to unionize. These are all positive demands, and
Yes.
they're clearly understandable.
Yes.
But what do these people want?
Yes.
Okay, they're fighting against privilege. Aren't you taking a privileged position by being proactive and taking these actions? Can you show me how it is a positive? Yes. I'll be willing to listen to you. Do you want to move the statue? Do you want to put it in a museum of statues? There's so many things you can do here, but
yes.
wanton destruction is not.
Yeah. Yes.
All right, from Mary Antonia Young, $5 super chat. Feels like the intensity of chaos and confusion is ramping up before the election in just over 100 days. Bracing for what will be thrown at us next.
Completely true. I mean, it's absolutely right. I mean, this has been the most turbulent year in American politics since 1968. I mean, it's the most turbulent election year, and we're nowhere close to election day yet. We've got weeks and weeks of this going on.
And the rate we're going, I like the reference to 1968, but at the rate things are going, it could be the most volatile year in American politics since 1860. You know what happened then, okay?
Yep.
There's a lack of leadership.
Be prepared.
Really lament, and I'm sorry I have to throw something.
Well, the other fundamental difference is that in 1968, there was still, the American political system still had legitimacy. I mean, it was all about fighting to win an election. I am not convinced that if Trump wins, the Democrats will accept his victory. I think it's much more likely that they won't. And then we're going to get into a very, very difficult situation.
Look, Alex, no matter what happens
on
election night, half the country is going to
reject. Exactly.
No matter the outcome.
Exactly.
Right. From Sparky, I knew from the first time I saw a flash mob do a dance routine in Grand Central Station that such technology could be used for instant global evil. Interesting comment.
It's a very interesting comment. Very interesting.
Very, very well said, Sparky. From Miss Penelope, a new member to the Duran community. Welcome, Miss Penelope. From Joseph Long, new member to the Duran community. Welcome, Joseph. From A. Sanchez, which of the major powers are the best and worst situated for the current international climate moving forward in both leadership and finance? Real quick, Alexander, Peter.
Well, I do think the Russians are, because they've been preparing for this for a very long time. I mean, I think ever since about 1999, some of the Yugoslav wars, they've been sensing that things were going wrong in the international system, and they've been working towards that end. And I think that they're reasonably well prepared. China, it's got problems in its domestic economy. It's got a political system which is perhaps rather brittle in places. I still think it's a major power. I think the United States has many problems, and they're getting worse.
Peter.
Well, I kind of echo what we just heard there. I mean, if you look out, particularly the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, insulated itself and done a very good job of it. If you look at its defense doctrine, its ability to project power is about 1,500 kilometers from its border. Yes. And Syria was in that, okay? But much further, they're not interested in doing it. Very defensive. If you look at their defense doctrine, then you look at their behavior, it's very defensive. Look at their arms outlays. They're all defensive.
Yes.
So, and China, of course, has a score to settle. I mean, what was done to it in the 19th and early 20th century, a century of shame as far as they're concerned. And they're not going. They don't trust capitalists with gifts. Believe me. Okay, they're I'm sorry. It was Greeks with gifts, I suppose it was. But they're not going to be fooled here. And of course, also they're mostly interested in their own country and the periphery around it for security, because they see how the United States surrounds countries with military bases, uses sanctions, uses trade agreements to punish what it believes to be its adversaries. Everybody knows this, okay? And you know how to take actions to avoid it.
All right, from Reckless Abandon, $5 super chat. Any comment about Putin revealing his role in sending the Russia peacekeepers to Pristina Airport in 1999?
I hadn't heard about that. That is interesting, very interesting indeed. Of course, at the time, if I'm right, I think he was still head of the FSB. But I have heard, and I've discussed this in other places. I heard from a Greek diplomat at the time, this is in 1999, that there was a considerable political power struggle going on in Moscow at this time, and that all sorts of people were involved, and Putin was certainly one of those who was involved. And it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that he was party to that decision in some way. Okay,
from Life of Brian, $4.99. Where can one find primary source docs for Russiagate?
Where, indeed? Well, not easy, because we don't have a full report. But if you go on the internet, I presume what you mean by primary source documents, you mean documents that are, the documents that the FBI was producing and keeping secret to itself, and which are now coming out. You can find a lot of them if you go to the congressional sites, because of course the various parts of Congress are now producing reports, and they're copying these documents. You will find also references to them in IG Horowitz's, the Inspector General Horowitz's various reports too. And of course, if you go to sites like John Solomon's Real Clear Investigations and Sarah Carter's, you will find them there also.
Consortiumnews.com has some really good articles.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Has been published a number of times.
Okay, from Sparky, $5 super chat. Oversimplification, but psychopaths are tabula rasa, black slates without moral teachings, which used to be from religion. They are selfishly evil.
Yes. Well, by the way, I should say, one of the things about you know, my work, my past work is I've had to deal with lots of psychopaths in my time, and you describe them extremely well. I mean, I've actually had to deal with psychopaths, and there is a psychopathic quality to a lot of what we're seeing, a complete disregard for facts. I'm not even talking about truth, I'm talking about facts, simple facts, the weaving of narratives, the absolute self-obsession, the recklessness, it's all there.
All right, from Nick Vamvlas, $5 super chat. Thank you very much, Nick. From Rubies 2000 is a new member to the Duran community. Welcome, Rubies. Dan Noyes, how long do you think BLM Antifa would last if their illicit funding was cut off? And number two, what was the first country GS bankrupted and why that country? George Soros.
Well, if you're talking about how long they would last, not very. I mean, there's obviously some people who would continue this thing for a while, but basically as organizations, they'd collapse instantly, like, you know, like a souffle, and you would see an awful lot of the steam coming out of these protests very, very fast if something like that were to happen. Now, which country was first bankrupted by what was it? What did he say? Was it
By George Soros.
Well, I would say, well, Britain suffered very badly from George Soros in 1992 when he bet against sterling during the ERM crisis. We weren't actually bankrupted then, but you know, his role in some of the East European states has been very bad. And of course, not just him, a whole lot of others, a whole lot of carpetbaggers and people like that. The country that always stands out for me is Russia. Russia went bankrupt in 1998, you know, default on its loans. There was a major financial crisis. The reason that happened was because all sorts of people had come into Russia, had speculated massively, had played around with Russian assets, had plundered and looted the country, and its economy imploded.
Okay, from Mad Marxist, $2 super chat. Class war by all means necessary. Thank you for that super chat, Mad Marxist. From Sparky, founding fathers of USA indicated that without a moral citizenry, their system of government wouldn't work.
Well, indeed. I mean, well, I think they have great belief in the essential morality of their citizenry. I think they would look upon these events with horror. I have to say, I mean, the thing about George Washington, if we could just come back to the fact that his statue was pulled down, he wanted to free his slaves. And of course, he did free his slaves in his will. He was persuaded against doing it by members of his family, and for various reasons, he wasn't prepared to go against them. I'm not going to say that he was a perfect man, but of all the people to go after at this time amongst the founding fathers, that does seem to me extraordinarily inappropriate that they should go after him. And I can't help but think, again, that it's not because he was a slave owner, a reluctant slave owner. It was because he stands for the United States. He was the first president. He was the man who led the American army, the Independence Army during the American War of Independence. So this is an attack not on Washington really, but on the United States itself and what it is.
All right, from Carrie Magnuson, rubles 1,000. Just want to support your work. Thank you very much for that. Maria Antonia Young, $10 super chat. Did you read the article in Breitbart headlined "Report: German officials place children with known pedophiles for 30 years"?
Right, I've seen the headline. I've not read the article. So, I mean, that's an article I don't want to comment on until I've actually read it. Sounds very disturbing.
Right, from Refi00, Garland and Lee split co-Intel Pro, I think was used.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow that, but
I'm not sure I follow that either. Garland and Lee.
Okay.
Split co-Intel Pro, I think was used.
Lee Stranahan and Garland Nixon?
Yeah.
Oh, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, I know there've been tensions between them over BLM. So if that's what's happened,
yeah.
it could very well be. I mean, this has been
have Garland on crosstalk on Monday.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
can you ask the questioner, is that what this is about?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Garland and Lee split COINTELPRO, I think, was used.
What is
COINTELPRO.
COINTELPRO Pro? I don't know what that is.
Anyway, just let us know in the live
Yeah,
stream if
please.
you have
But
any
as I
more
said,
info,
I mean,
more context on that.
they were finding it very difficult to
It's on
find
their show last week.
Yeah. Anyway, let us know in the live stream
Yeah.
what you know about that. Sparky, $10 super chat. CV19 is the underlying cause of much pneumonia. In the past, no one tracked the underlying cause of pneumonia, whether it was SARS, MERS, colds, etc. Suddenly, governments care and use it to gain power.
Well, I think we've got to be a bit careful because, as I said, if you look across Europe, and definitely there has been a significant spike in mortality rates, and this has been true in all European countries. So something definitely did happen in Europe. And it was not, can I just say, because I know this is going to be said, it wasn't the lockdowns, because countries which had lockdowns, which didn't have CV, they didn't suffer the same big spike in mortality rates. So something did take place this summer, this year. And, you know, let's not be in any doubt about this.
All right, from Sparky, $5 super chats. Similar viruses don't usually share the same host. Most CV deaths would have died from a different pneumonia anyway.
Well, again, as I said, there has been a spike in death rates. I mean, Moscow, the spike in death rates in Moscow in May was around 50%.
Okay, from Dan Noyes, $2 super chat. Woke creates class system in a society without classes.
Yes.
Agreed.
Yes. I mean, it's almost by definition it does.
From Sparky, $5 super chat. It's easier to fool someone than to convince them that they've been fooled. Mark Twain. People won't admit they're fooled by Dr. Fauci.
No.
At all.
At all.
Let's see, but this is really a phenomenon of the 20th century, is the cult of experts, okay? And they have political agendas as well. I mean, Fauci, I mean, he's turned into the butt of a joke right now. I mean, I would say to Fauci, why don't you talk less and never give your opinion? Just give us facts. I mean, no one is going to agree to another lockdown. No. Well, why should they?
Fauci should never have been should never have been speaking in public at all. I come back to what I say about Fauci. He is there to advise the president. That's his job. Touring TV stations and contradicting what the president says, as he's just done again, is not something he should be doing. I'm just incredulous that this man is still in post. Mm-hmm.
All right. From Russell Hall, people often lament that the postmodern Marcusian left is fundamentally different from days of yore, but are they familiar with the concept of a bait and switch? Political parties maneuver their rhetoric to forward an agenda.
Well, I think that there is a difference because I mean, I've lived through, I mean, especially in Europe. I mean, I'm not obviously as familiar with the US as I am in Europe, but I mean, to give an example, I mean, the German Social Democratic Party and the British Labour Party are profoundly different organizations from the ones they were 30 years ago. I mean, there's just no resemblance at all. In fact, the kind of people who lead them are so completely different. It is inconceivable that they could have existed in the Labour Party of 30 years ago.
Well, I wanted to comment on something that was said a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
With Black Lives Matter and this wokeist cult. I have a real strong feeling that if Biden wins, then the Democratic establishment will shut it all down. Okay, yeah. Because it works to their advantage right now. I mean, yes. It's really unscrupulous, but that's just what the kind of people we're dealing with. They want all this, as much chaos as possible right up to the election, because they think people will vote against Trump. Okay, it's a referendum on the Trump presidency. It's not an election between two candidates. It's a referendum, and so if they pull this off, and they might, they'll shut it all down. They'll just shut it all out. You've served your purpose, okay? You've served your purpose, okay?
They will try to do it. Whether they can is another matter. But that is what they will try to do. I agree. They will try and turn it off like a tap.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's what I think. No, it's because, look, it's all these wokest corporations. They're the ones that are pouring money into this. As soon as Biden is elected, they'll just turn the spigot off. Okay.
Yes.
Boom.
Yes.
Mission
Okay, from Mad Marxists, brown people want cross the bordered because the U.S. imperialists have impoverished their countries. Want to cross the border because the U.S. imperialists have impoverished their countries.
There's a lot of truth to this, and it's certainly true in Europe also, by the way. I mean, if you're talking about places like Syria and Libya, if we hadn't had those wars, we wouldn't have an immigration crisis, a migrant crisis of the kind that we're having now. I mean, but there we are.
Okay, from Mary Antonia Young, $5 super chat. If the U.S. is a racist country, then how did Obama get elected? Not just once, but twice.
Well, excellent question. Very well said.
From Edward Turner, $50 super chat. Thank you very much, Edward Turner, for that super chat. That is awesome. From Sparky, cop in Atlanta is lucky. Paul Howard is famous for losing high-profile cases. Unfortunate incident, but it's mostly outside agitators causing problems.
Well, this trial, it's a mess already.
No one's going to win from it. Yeah, no one's going to win from this trial, no matter the verdict.
It was an investigation, okay? I mean, and over charging like this is so counterproductive. The district attorney is simply a moron. Okay, I mean, he's a corrupt DA. He has sexual assault charges against him. He's up for re-election. Oh my God, isn't this a gift for him? Okay, he will let Atlanta. Not only Atlanta will burn, the whole country will burn. And you put this moron in the driver's seat. 2020 is just keeps getting better and better, doesn't it?
From Dan Noyes, $5 super chat. U.S. in the 60s, Woodstock was held during the height of the H3N2 influenza pandemic.
Yes, I know.
From David Dienstag, $5 super chat. In fairness, many brown people come to the U.S. because Washington makes a mess of their countries.
Yes.
True. From infoseeker.maduro, DKK200. Thanks for being you. Thank you very much for that super chat. From Sparky, $2 super chat. Mayor Lance Bottoms now co-opted by establishment. True.
Yeah.
From Sparky, FDA's been very corrupt for decades. HCQ's much safer than aspirin in Tylenol. I took it like candy when I was in the army in Africa. Right. Thank you very much for that. From Gray Matters, $2 super chat. Your Native American grandma loves you, Duran. Thank you very much for that. Gray Matters. From Mary Antonia Young, $5 super chat. According to Dr. Rashid Buttar, President Trump has had since his election 25 thwarted attempts on his life. Pray for his protection and safety.
Well, I absolutely. I mean, I definitely so. I mean, any other possibility is just too distressing and frightening to contemplate. So let us definitely hope that those scenarios don't play out.
Okay, from Sparky, $5 super chat. Republicans, Roosevelt and Taft had already begun racial integration of government and military. Democrat hero Woodrow Wilson reversed it.
Correct.
Correct. Very correct. From Dan Noyes, I vehemently disagree with the comments regarding libertarians. Sovereign citizens acting in their own behalf is the only permanent solution. That's number one. Number two, in a separate super chat, monopolies, corruption are constructs of the government. Minimize government and you minimize corruption and disruptions.
Well, if we're looking at the cartel of monopolies, which are the tech companies, then I agree with that entirely. Without the help of the government, they could not have achieved the extraordinary power that they have.
Okay.
Well, libertarianism. I'm not talking about basic rights. No, but what my problem is the way they look at the functioning of the economy. I mean, look, I mean, government is a fact of our lives here, okay? It's good policy that I want, okay? I don't want to just defund and get rid of the entire government. That is silliness, okay? That's silly, okay? But I don't think there's anything wrong with having good, smart government policy. Too many libertarians just don't want government. Well, that's this kind of a cutesy conversation over beer, okay, or wine in the shower. But it's devoid from reality.
Okay, from Nick Von Vlas, $5 super chat. What's the most effective way to deal with the brainwashed Marxist mob? They blatantly state they want to demolish the framework of the Constitution.
Don't bow and don't take the knee. Just don't do it. Okay. And they're going to say all terrible things about you. They'll all pile on. Okay. Just stand your ground. Stand your ground. Okay.
Okay. Agreed. Don't bow. Mad Marxists, $5 super chat. Western imperialism and Western wars and terrorism is why people of color want to migrate. Workers of the world unite.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for that super chat, Mad Marxist. From David Ditstang, 6 ways to Sunday equals a turbulent year. 6 ways to Sunday. From Schumer, yes, his warning.
I remember that so well.
Yep. From Sparky, $5 super chat. In my day, even uneducated Americans knew importance of freedom of speech. Millennials with their outer Mongolian gender studies degree, etc. don't. That would be some degree.
What's happened is that 40 years ago, we had a Majorian society. It was based on the middle class, okay? And it wasn't color, okay? Though, you know, there were issues in the South, okay? But there was a consensus on so many important things, and that consensus has unraveled, all right? And put into question the legitimacy of the authorities, okay? This is how we've gotten here. But as that middle class shrunk, the consensus dissipated as well. And I'm not surprised we are where we are.
Yeah, I mean, what I would just quickly add to that, though, is that if you have no freedom of speech, a consensus cannot exist. Because without a freedom of speech and a free exchange of ideas, how can people talk to each other and form views which can then coalesce into a consensus? It becomes impossible. So we have a very, very pernicious feedback, and it is undermining democracy, because without freedom of speech, democracy cannot function. This was very well understood when the United States was established. It is being forgotten now.
Yeah, but see, it makes it a revolutionary movement, because revolutions don't believe in elections, okay? Because they don't want a traditional form of legitimizing power. They want to dismantle that. So they actually, with their democracy is abhorrent to these people, because it is a will to power. It is a movement of power based on some kind of righteousness, okay? Elections are too mundane and too bourgeois, if I can use that term. No, that's why they're tearing statues down. They don't want to have a conversation. They always say they want to have a conversation, but they don't, okay? And they don't want elections to determine things, because they can't win elections. Okay, that happens all through history.
From Spark,
try to overthrow the state.
From Sparky, $5 super chat. Election fraud, including ballot harvesting, is the most important issue in the U.S. Nothing's been done about it. Typically, Democrats count the votes.
Yes. I mean, without a functioning voting system, how can you have any kind of democracy?
From Star Trooper, $2 super chat. Trump sanctions Assad. What's going on?
This is a subject we need to talk about in a full video, because it's a complicated one. I think there's a lot of pulling and pushing within the US. And there's also, I think, a sense that because of the economic crisis in Syria, which is imported into Syria from Lebanon, the Syrian government is weaker. And so there's some people who are pushing very hard to try and do that. I think all these calculations will fail. And I think that it will not achieve the objectives that some people are saying. But this is a complicated story. It requires a lot of time to discuss and analyze.
All right, from Gray Matters, Mo Wampum, Sitting Bull Bearing Beads. Thank you very much, Gray Matters, for that super chat. From Iris and Amarado, $3 super chat. Thank you very much. Iris. From Sparky, never let carpetbaggers, Bill Browder, HRC, Biden, and all off the hook.
No.
Agree with you there.
Completely
Sparky.
agree.
From Dan Noyes, $5 super chat. Why does George Soros and his associates bankrupt countries that were enemies of Germany in World War II?
Well, I don't think that this has been I don't think this is part of the agenda. I think for Soros, if I have to say, the country that he's most hostile to at the moment is Russia. Has been for a long time, and not just Soros, but all of this group of oligarchs that we've been talking about, because they thought that they would be able to get into Russia and they'd be able to enrich themselves, and for a time they did, and then it was all stopped, and they've never forgiven the country for that.
All right. From Nick Van Vlas, a statue of Stephen Douglas, Lincoln's Democratic adversary and proponent of slavery, stands untouched in Chicago. Hypocrisy, thy name is BLM.
Yeah.
All right. And Refi 499 says, at Fault Lines Radio, new host Jamari Thomas and Shane Strahan. Sorry to inform you all, but it's true. Some callers would make their arguments worse.
Oh, right.
Okay. All right, let me see if I understand. That seems kind of convoluted to me. So Lee Stranahan is still there and Garland Nixon is left. Is that the...
Yeah, new host is Jamari Thomas. I don't know if you know him, and Shane Stranahan. Shane Stranahan.
Yeah.
So there's a Lee Stranahan and there's a Shane Stranahan.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe. Sorry to inform you, but it's true. Some callers would make their arguments worse.
Oh dear. Oh well.
Well, yeah, it's been a... Okay, so
they got along so well. I don't understand this.
Well, no. I mean, last time I went on the program.
Well, here's another one from Courtney. Here's another one from. Okay, wait. Gray Matters, $2 super chat. Dr. Fauci or Dr. Faustus, we presume? Question mark. All right, thank you very much. Gray Matters for that super chat. Here it is. Courtney Harlow. Yes, Lee and Garland are no longer hosting Fault Lines. Lee's son Shane and Jamal Thomas took over. They clashed a lot over BLM. Yes. Lee has his own show on populist TV.
Okay.
There you go. Cleared up. So Lee has his own show. Okay, from Brando Commando, $10 super chat. The problem with this specific movement is that it's leaderless. Their end goal is unclear and the demands are one-sided. Not sure how this will end. So I don't know if I'm black-pilled or optimistic.
Well, I mean,
leader is intentional. Okay. That's obvious. I think there is a leader somewhere, but it's not that person's face is not made public. That's intentional because then it keeps the movement more diffuse and more difficult to attack. So this is an intentional thing.
Yes.
Okay. From Maria Antonia Young, $5 super chat. Crowd ordering tickets for next Trump rally is bigger than Woodstock. Comments. That's 1 million strong.
I've heard the same. I've heard the
There's
same.
a lot.
This
speaks for itself.
Yeah.
Sit down.
Speaks for itself. Mad Marxists, $5 super chat. What is worse, having an evil fascist running your country or having an evil senile fascist running your country?
Well,
it's a self-answering question. Okay, let's leave it there.
Yeah.
From Sparky, $5 super chat. Atlanta may smolder, but it won't burn. Not enough racial animosity. By the way, was surprised to see 2 white cops together. Police force is thoroughly mixed.
Well, I mean, they have the pictures of the anarchist that set the Wendy's on fire. It was a white woman.
Yeah. From Sparky, Peter, there were racial issues up north as well. Remember Boston school busing?
Yes. Everybody hated busing. Everybody did. Blacks, whites, everybody hated it. Okay. I don't know why Kamala Harris went after old Joe, Sleepy Joe. I mean, I remembered, I was a tot, I was a little kid, but I can remember that divided the countries very severely. And it was very, very unpopular with everyone.
Okay, that is it, guys. A lot of super chats.
Wow.
That's it.
We got another Christopher hour again.
Another Asavet MD sent us a $10 super chat. Thank you very much, Asavet MD, for that super chat as well. We appreciate all the questions and comments, guys. Well, any final words? Any last words?
Yeah, it's been an absolutely stimulating conversation. And look at the vast range of topics we've covered. We've talked about history, we've talked about politics, we've talked about the ideas. I mean, it's extraordinary. So, I mean, it's been an extraordinary conversation. I mean, and discussion, and a stimulating one. I won't deny, also a tiring thing to work through, but hugely positive to also be answering questions like this.
Why, from Claire Call, why not define fascism one of these days?
A difficult thing to do. Lots have tried, but certainly we should talk about these things too. Yeah,
that's a really interesting topic, and I echo what Alexander McKeer just said. It's very difficult to define. Yeah. But as William O. Douglas said during a court case that was addressed to the Supreme Court about what is pornography, he said, "I don't know what pornography is, but I know when I see it."
I know when I see it. Yeah. Oh, and one more super chat from Sparky. All this mess matches weather underground strategic plans uncovered by infiltrator.
Yeah.
Yeah, Laura Ingram had on her program 3 weeks ago about that. That's an interesting segment. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that was interesting. All right, guys, that's it. Asavet MD sent us another $10 super chat. Thank you very much, Asavet MD, for that super chat again. And Spartan Warrior Queen, thank you so much.
Again.
An awesome job moderating. We really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Have a great weekend, everybody. Be safe. Take care. We are signing off, guys.